I am Lauren, 34 years old, and my mother decided Mother's Day was the perfect occasion to hand me an $80,000 invoice for being a disappointment. She announced this debt to our entire extended family, all 50 of them gathered in a private dining room. She expected me to cry and beg for forgiveness. Instead, I sent a single photograph that caused 49 relatives to block her number by morning. The 50th relative was my grandmother, and what she did was far worse. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart a toxic family member who thought they could walk all over you. The air in Seattle's most exclusive Michelin star restaurant smelled of roasted truffles and forced affection. I sat near the center of a long white table nursing sparkling water while 50 relatives talked over each other. To my left sat my younger sister, Madeline. At 30, she was the family golden child, a lifestyle influencer, currently adjusting her phone to perfectly capture her artisan caviar risotto. Beside her was her husband, Jamal. A sharp-dressed African-American man in a tailored suit, Jamal was the prized son-in-law. A former stockbroker, he now claimed to run a crypto hedge fund my parents treated as the pinnacle of financial success. "It is all about blockchain infrastructure," Harrison Jamal said, leaning toward my father. He swirled his expensive Bordeaux. "We are disrupting traditional finance. Seed rounds are closing at 50 million minimum. You need vision." My father, Harrison, a 60-year-old man who always agreed with my mother, nodded eagerly. "Brilliant, Jamal. It takes real intellect to navigate those markets." "Unlike some sectors," Jamal added, looking at me with a condescending smirk. "No offense, Lauren. I am sure resetting passwords is honest work. The IT support game just does not have the same scale." Madeline giggled, a sharp, piercing sound. "Do not be mean, babe. Lauren's little tech job pays her rent. Mostly." I did not defend myself. I just took a slow sip of my water. They still called it IT support. What no one in this room knew was that the little tech job was actually a software platform I had built in my Seattle apartment. 2 weeks ago, a Silicon Valley conglomerate acquired it for $75 million in an all-cash deal. I wore a simple black dress, but the custom watch hidden under my sleeve cost more than Jamal's entire wardrobe. I kept quiet because wealth talks, but real power listens. At the head of the table sat my mother, Caroline. At 58, she was obsessed with high society. Her platinum hair was perfectly coiffed, her neck draped in diamonds I knew were purchased on credit. It was time for gifts. Madeline and Jamal presented theirs first, handing over a vibrant orange designer handbag. Caroline gasped, pressing her hands to her cheeks. "Oh, Madeline, Jamal, it is breathtaking. You should not have." "Only the best," Jamal beamed. I knew what that bag cost, and I also knew his crypto fund was bleeding cash. The math did not add up, but performative wealth was exactly what Caroline craved. All eyes turned to me. I handed my mother a thick envelope. She opened it, picking at the wax seal. "A weekend retreat at the Salish Lodge." She read aloud, her voice devoid of enthusiasm. "How quaint." "Thank you, Lauren. I am sure it is peaceful." "It includes full spa treatments," I added quietly. Caroline offered a patronizing smile. "Well, we all give what we can afford. It is the thought that counts, even if the thought is a bit restricted." Uncomfortable laughter washed over the table. Cousins exchanged pitying glances. This was how it had been since I dropped out of medical school 10 years ago to code. I had shattered Caroline's dream of boasting about her doctor daughter at her country club. I was the stain on her pristine social record. Caroline stood up, tapping her spoon against her crystal wine glass. The room fell completely silent. 50 faces turned toward the matriarch. Family. Caroline began, her voice carrying the projection of a seasoned manipulator. "Mother's Day is a time of reflection. I look at Madeline and Jamal and I see success. I see children who honor their parents." She paused, turning her cold blue eyes entirely on me. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. But leadership in a family also means accountability. She continued reaching into her designer handbag. She pulled out a white envelope and walked slowly around the table until she stood directly behind my chair. She dropped the envelope onto my plate. It landed with a soft, heavy thud next to my dinner. "Open it, Lauren." I stared at the envelope. "What is this, Mom?" "Open it," Harrison echoed from the other end of the table. With steady hands, I broke the seal and pulled out an itemized invoice. It was formatted like a professional legal document. The header at the top read, "The cost of raising a failure." Every word was typed in a bold font designed to maximize my humiliation. Below it was an itemized list spanning the last decade: wasted tuition, emotional distress caused by my dropout damage to the family reputation, and lost investment opportunities due to supporting a dead-end career. The total balance due was exactly $80,000. "You have 48 hours to pay this, Lauren," Caroline announced, her voice echoing off the restaurant walls, making sure everyone heard every single syllable. "You will wire the funds, or you will be permanently expunged from this family. No more holidays, no more contact. We are done carrying dead weight." I looked up at her, my pulse steady. I had spent my entire life preparing for this moment. Let the games finally begin. The silence in the Michelin-starred dining room was absolute, heavy and suffocating. 50 sets of eyes were locked onto me, waiting for the inevitable breakdown. They expected tears. They expected me to beg to explain that my little IT job could not possibly cover an $80,000 extortion fee. To my left, I saw Madeline slightly angle her phone, her thumb resting on the record button. She was discreetly filming the humiliation for her private group chats, ready to share my demise with her followers. Beside her, Jamal leaned back in his chair, a smug, satisfied grin plastered across his face. He sipped his wine as if he were watching a highly entertaining theater production. At the other end of the table, my father puffed out his chest, trying to project authority, but merely looking like a man desperate for his wife's approval. Aunts and uncles exchanged uncomfortable glances. Some looked down at their plates. Others stared with morbid curiosity. The waitstaff lingered near the double doors, clearly unsure if they should intervene or pretend they were invisible. I looked down at the invoice again. The cost of raising a failure. The sheer audacity of it did not trigger my grief. It triggered my absolute cold-blooded focus. For a decade, I had absorbed their subtle jabs, their passive-aggressive slights, and their outright disrespect because I believed naively in the sanctity of blood. I had spent holidays shrinking myself to make them comfortable. I had listened to them praise Madeline for maxing out credit cards while they mocked me for building a sustainable business. But looking at Carolyn's triumphant face, I realized that blood did not make us family. It merely made us related. And in the business world, when a hostile entity presents you with a fraudulent invoice, you do not cry. You audit them. I did not run to the bathroom to weep. I did not stand up and shout defensively. I simply picked up my glass of sparkling water, took a leisurely sip, and set it down precisely on the coaster. The clink of the glass against the wood sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. $80,000, I said, my voice calm, projecting clearly across the silent room. "A very specific number, Mother." I ran my finger down the itemized list, reading the absurd charges out loud. Wasted pre-med tuition, $45,000. Emotional distress caused by academic dropout, $15,000. Damage to family reputation at the country club, $10,000. Lost investment opportunities due to supporting a dead-end career, $10,000. Caroline sneered, crossing her arms over her diamond necklace. She looked immensely proud of her accounting. "Do not try to bluff your way out of this, Lauren. We all know you do not have a fraction of that money. This is about accountability. It is about you finally taking responsibility for the embarrassment you have been to this family name for the last 10 years. "You want accountability," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly level. "Are you absolutely sure you want to settle all debts today? Right here, in front of everyone?" Caroline slammed her hand flat on the table, making the silverware rattle. "Do not use that tone with me, young lady. You will respect your mother. You will acknowledge the sacrifices we made for you. We gave you everything and you threw it back in our faces to sit behind a computer screen. Harrison cleared his throat loudly. Listen to your mother, Lauren. We are tired of making excuses for you to our friends. When people ask what our eldest daughter does, we have to change the subject. It is humiliating. I shifted my gaze to my father. You do not have to change the subject, Dad. You choose to because you measure a person's worth by their job title and their bank account. Jamal let out a loud, mocking laugh. He placed his elbows on the table, leaning forward aggressively. Just take the loss, Lauren. You are out of your depth. You cannot even afford the sparkling water in this room, let alone an 80 grand invoice. Why do you not just apologize, set up a payment plan with your parents, and save us all the headache of looking at your sad face? Madeline nodded vigorously, her phone still angled toward me. Seriously, Lauren, you are ruining Mother's Day. Mom just wants you to take responsibility. Is that so hard? You always have to make everything so difficult and dramatic. I looked at my sister, then at her husband, and finally back to my mother. The old me would have shattered under the weight of their combined contempt. The old me would have believed their narrative, internalized their disgust, and spent years trying to earn back their conditional love. But the woman sitting at that table was a CEO who had just outmaneuvered some of the most ruthless venture capitalists in Silicon Valley. This family dinner was child's play compared to a boardroom negotiation. I will not be paying this invoice, I stated firmly, pushing the paper away from me. Not a single cent. Caroline's face flushed with fury. Her eyes widened, completely enraged that I was defying her in front of an audience. Then you are out? She snapped, her voice trembling with anger. You are entirely cut off. You will not be invited to Thanksgiving. You will not attend Christmas. You are no longer welcome in our home. If you walk out of this restaurant without agreeing to pay you, cease to be a member of this family forever. I smiled, a genuine, relaxed smile that clearly unsettled my mother. She had expected a desperate plea to stay in her good graces. She had weaponized my belonging, assuming I valued my place in this toxic family more than my own dignity. I accept your terms, I said smoothly. But if we are permanently severing ties today, we are going to do a full and accurate accounting of exactly who owes what to whom. Because you brought up the word accountability, Mother, and I absolutely love that word. I reached into my small black clutch and pulled out my phone. The device felt heavy in my hand, loaded with digital ammunition that was about to level the entire playing field. I unlocked the screen, the bright light illuminating my face in the dimly lit dining room. Let us talk about accountability, Jamal, I said, pivoting my gaze directly to my brother-in-law. His smug grin faltered for a fraction of a second before he recovered his arrogant posture. Excuse me, Jamal scoffed, adjusting his expensive cuffs. This is between you and your mother, Lauren. Do not try to drag me into your mess just because you are broke and embarrassed. I tapped the screen of my phone, navigating past my emails and into a secure, encrypted folder. Oh, but you are already in it, Jamal, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous conversational register. Deeply, deeply in it. The air in the room grew completely stagnant. The 50 relatives watching us seemed to hold their collective breath. I had their undivided attention, and I was about to use it to completely dismantle everything they thought they knew about me. You see, Jamal talks a huge game about cryptocurrency and decentralized finance, I said loudly. But exactly 32 days ago, the brilliant hedge fund manager called the IT support girl at 2 in the morning because his supposed $50 million operation was entirely compromised. Madeline's eyes widened. What are you talking about? Jamal, what is she saying? She is lying! Jamal snapped, pointing a trembling finger at me. She is trying to deflect because she is broke. Caroline, tell her to leave right now. I did not argue. I just pressed play. I turned the volume to the absolute maximum. Jamal's panicked, breathless voice echoed out of my phone speakers, raw and completely unedited. Lauren, you have to help me, please. Please, God, you have to fix this. They hacked the liquidity pool. The money is gone, Lauren. It is all gone. The investors are going to kill me. It is a Ponzi, Lauren. I leveraged it all on margin and it crashed. If you do not patch the back end before morning, the federal investigators are going to see I do not have the reserves. Please, I will do anything. I hit pause. The blood drained entirely from Jamal's face, leaving him looking sickly and hollow. He stared at the phone in my hand as if it were a live grenade. Madeline dropped her phone. It hit the hardwood floor with a loud crack, the screen shattering instantly. A Ponzi, she shrieked, grabbing Jamal's arm with manicured claws. You said we were leading a seed round. You bought me a designer bag today. With what money, Jamal? I asked coldly. Because when I looked at the back end of your servers, which were built on a template a 12-year-old could hack, by the way, I saw exactly where the remaining funds were going. You bought that bag with stolen capital. That is wire fraud. You hacked my servers, Jamal yelled. He stood up so fast his chair crashed to the floor. You gave me the administrative passwords, Jamal. I just ran a diagnostic. I replied, maintaining absolute calm in the face of his panic. I did not fix it, by the way. I do not touch fraudulent code. The relatives were now murmuring loudly. Panic was spreading like a virus. Aunts and uncles who had invested their retirement savings into Jamal's fund were suddenly pulling out their phones, their faces masked in pure horror. Some were already dialing their banks. Madeline turned on me, her face flushed with a mix of humiliation and fury. How could you do this to us? You planned this to ruin my life because you are jealous. You have always been jealous of me. Jealous of what, Madeline? I asked, turning my focus to my sister. Jealous that you built your influencer brand on a stolen foundation. 5 years ago, I drafted a business plan for a digital marketing agency. I left it on the kitchen counter when I visited for Christmas. You took it, pitched it to Jamal's network as your own, and used my intellectual property to launch your career. I stayed silent because Mom begged me not to ruin your big break. That is a lie, Madeline screamed, though her eyes darted nervously toward her husband. It is fully documented, I stated. And the irony is, you could not even sustain it without Jamal funneling stolen money into your sponsored posts to make you look successful. Harrison stood up, slamming his fists onto the table. His face was flushed red with rage. Lauren, that is enough. You are fabricating evidence to destroy your sister's marriage because you are bitter. You will show your family respect right this instant. Respect, I echoed, turning my gaze to my father. Let us talk about your respect, Dad. Let us talk about the $80,000. I opened a folder on my phone, pulling up a scanned document. I held the screen high so Harrison and Caroline could see it clearly. This is a bank statement from 8 years ago, I announced, from an account set up by Grandma Constance, an account specifically designated as my college fund. Do you remember this account, Mom? Caroline visibly stiffened. She gripped my chair, her knuckles turning white. That was family money. You forfeited it when you dropped out of medical school. I dropped out 10 years ago, I corrected her, my voice dropping to a glacial chill. This withdrawal was made 8 years ago. Exactly $80,000. Withdrawn in a single cashier's check signed by Caroline. I looked directly at Madeline, who was currently hyperventilating over her husband's collapsing fraud. Madeline, what kind of car did Mom and Dad buy you as a wedding present 8 years ago? Madeline blinked, tears ruining her applied makeup. A luxury sports car. And do you know how much that exact model cost 8 years ago? I asked. I did not wait. $80,000. This invoice, I held up the ridiculous paper my mother had given me, is not a penalty for my failures. It is an accounting trick. You are trying to create a paper trail of owed debts because Grandma Constance has initiated a full audit of her family trusts this month. You are terrified she's going to find out you embezzled my college fund to buy your favorite daughter a car. The collective gasp from the room was palpable. The waitstaff had completely stopped moving. Caroline's jaw dropped. She had severely underestimated me. For a decade, she had treated me like a punching bag, assuming my silence was weakness. She never anticipated that I was simply gathering data. You little ungrateful wretch, Caroline hissed, abandoning all pretense of high society grace. She raised her hand and struck me across the face. The crack echoed loudly. I did not flinch. You are dead to me, Caroline spat, typing furiously on her phone to email the invoice to everyone. Send it, Mom, I whispered. Make it permanent. Create the written record. Caroline's thumb slammed down on the screen. The digital swoosh of the outgoing message cut through the heavy silence of the dining room. Less than a second later, a synchronized wave of chimes buzzes and notification bells erupted across the long table. 50 smartphones lit up simultaneously. Aunts, uncles, and cousins reached into their pockets and purses. I watched their faces as they opened the email. The subject line glowed on their screens, bold and vindictive, labeling me a total failure and a financial parasite. There was a collective intake of breath as they viewed the attached photograph of the $80,000 invoice. Caroline stood at the head of the table, her chest heaving, a twisted mask of triumph on her face. She truly believed she had just delivered the ultimate killing blow. She thought this digital excommunication would force me to crumble, to fall to my knees and beg for readmittance into her elite fabricated reality. Instead, I simply picked up my black clutch from the table. I smoothed the fabric of my dress and looked around the room. The contrast was almost poetic. Madeline was sobbing into her linen napkin. Her phone shattered on the floor, her influencer fantasy destroyed by the revelation of her husband's wire fraud. Jamal was staring blankly at the wall, gripping his hair, hyperventilating, as the reality of his collapsing Ponzi scheme and impending federal investigation settled over him. Harrison, my father, remained frozen in his chair, stripped of his patriarchal authority, utterly humiliated by the exposed bank statements proving they had stolen my college fund to buy a sports car. And then there was Caroline, standing amid the wreckage of her family, desperately clinging to a fraudulent $80,000 invoice as if it were a shield. "You are done," Caroline spat, her voice shaking with adrenaline. "Leave my sight. Do not ever contact us again." I did not offer a dramatic parting speech. I did not need to. The evidence I had dumped on the table was already doing the work for me. I offered my mother a single polite, chilling smile, turned on my heel, and walked out of the private dining room. The transition from the stifling, perfume-heavy air of the restaurant to the crisp, cool evening breeze of Seattle was incredibly refreshing. I handed my ticket to the valet and waited quietly. Minutes later, a sleek, armored Audi pulled up to the curb. It was not a flashy luxury vehicle meant to attract attention. It was a fortress on wheels designed for security and discretion, completely paid off. I slipped into the driver's seat, the heavy door closing with a solid, satisfying thud that blocked out all the noise of the city. The adrenaline that had carried me through the dinner was beginning to fade, replaced by a sharp, calculating focus. The emotional warfare was over. Now it was time for the digital execution. I opened the center console and retrieved my laptop, resting it against the steering wheel. The screen glowed to life in the dark cabin. I bypassed the standard login screens and connected to my heavily encrypted mobile hotspot. I did not open my personal email just yet. Instead, I navigated to the secure backend of my corporate asset management portal. I bypassed my main enterprise accounts and scrolled down to a specific isolated entity. Phoenix Holdings, LLC. To understand Phoenix Holdings, you had to look back exactly 3 years. Caroline and Harrison had spent decades living far beyond their means to maintain their status at the country club. They took out second and third mortgages to fund luxury vacations, designer wardrobes, and massive injections of cash into Jamal's failing business ventures. Eventually, the bill came due. They defaulted on their massive $5 million estate. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings. Caroline was days away from having her designer luggage tossed onto the street by the local sheriff, a social humiliation she would not have survived. Then a mysterious corporate investor swooped in, purchasing the property entirely in cash, directly from the bank. This faceless LLC offered my parents a generous lease agreement, allowing them to remain in the home and save face. Caroline and Harrison bragged to the entire family that an anonymous admirer of Harrison's business acumen had bailed them out. They had no idea the anonymous admirer was the daughter they constantly belittled. I bought my childhood home through Phoenix Holdings to prevent them from becoming homeless. I charged them a fraction of the market rent, asking only that they cover the basic property taxes and maintenance. But Caroline and Harrison were entitled. Over the past 14 months, they had stopped paying even that discounted rent. They ignored the notices from the property management company, assuming the faceless corporate landlord would not bother evicting them. because Harrison kept promising a massive payout from Jamal's crypto fund. I pulled up the corporate ledger on my screen. I highlighted the outstanding balance for the past 14 months of unpaid rent. The total arrears amounted to exactly $80,000. The poetry of that number was almost too perfect. The sheer hubris of Caroline trying to extort $80,000 from me for being a failure while she secretly owed me the exact same amount just to keep a roof over her head. I opened my email client. Caroline's mass email was sitting in my inbox alongside 50 other recipients. I hit the reply all button. I needed attachments. First, I accessed the legal portal and downloaded the official property deed for the estate, clearly showing Phoenix Holdings, LLC, as the sole owner. Next, I downloaded the corporate ownership documents from the state registry, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that I was the sole proprietor and managing director of Phoenix Holdings. Finally, I accessed the portal for the King County Sheriff's Office. I downloaded the official court-ordered eviction notice. I had authorized my lawyers to finalize it just 10 minutes prior, knowing exactly how this dinner was going to end. The document bore the bright red stamp of the county legally mandating the immediate removal of Caroline and Harrison from the premises due to severe delinquency. I attached all 3 PDF documents to the email draft. I stared at the recipient list. 50 relatives who had just received my mother's demand for payment. 50 relatives who were currently sitting in that dining room reeling from the exposure of Jamal's wire fraud and the stolen college fund. I placed my fingers on the keyboard and prepared to write the only response Caroline would ever receive. "You see, Jamal talks a huge game about cryptocurrency and decentralized finance," I said, my voice echoing clearly across the silent, private dining room. "He loves to use words like blockchain and liquidity to impress people who do not understand them." But exactly 32 days ago, the brilliant hedge fund manager called the IT support girl at 2 in the morning because his supposed $50 million operation was entirely compromised. Madeline's eyes darted between me and her husband. "What are you talking about, Jamal?" "What is she saying? She is lying," Jamal snapped, pointing a trembling finger at me. The arrogant facade was completely gone, replaced by raw, unadulterated panic. "She is trying to deflect because she is broke and embarrassed. Caroline, tell her to leave right now." I did not argue. I just pressed play on my phone screen and turned the volume to the absolute maximum. Jamal's panicked, breathless voice echoed out of the small speakers, raw and undeniable. "Lauren, you have to help me, please. Please, God, you have to fix this. They hacked the liquidity pool. The money is gone, Lauren. It is all gone. The investors are going to kill me. It is a Ponzi, Lauren. I leveraged it all on margin, and it crashed. If you do not patch the back end before morning, the federal investigators are going to see I do not have the reserves. Please, I will do anything." I hit pause. The blood drained entirely from Jamal's face, leaving him looking sickly and hollow. He stared at the phone in my hand as if it were a loaded weapon. Madeline dropped her fork. It hit her porcelain plate with a loud clatter. "A Ponzi," she shrieked, grabbing Jamal's arm with her manicured hands. "You said we were leading a seed round. You bought me a designer bag today." "With what money, Jamal?" I asked coldly. "Because when I looked at the back end of your servers, which were built on a template, a 12-year-old could hack by the way I saw exactly where the remaining funds were going. You bought that bag with stolen capital. That is wire fraud." "You hacked my servers!" Jamal yelled. He stood up so fast, his chair crashed backward onto the hardwood floor. "You gave me the administrative passwords when you begged me to save you, Jamal. I just ran a diagnostic," I replied, maintaining absolute calm in the face of his escalating hysteria. "I did not fix it, by the way. I do not touch fraudulent code." The relatives were now murmuring loudly. Panic was spreading like a virus through the room. Aunts and uncles who had eagerly invested their retirement savings into Jamal's fund were suddenly pulling out their phones, their faces masked in pure horror. Some were already standing up, dialing their banks. Madeline turned on me, her face flushed with a mix of severe humiliation and fury. "How could you do this to us? You planned this to ruin my life because you are jealous. You have always been jealous of me." "Jealous of what, Madeline?" I asked, shifting my focus entirely to my sister. "Jealous that you built your influencer brand on a stolen foundation. 5 years ago, I drafted a comprehensive business plan for a digital marketing agency. I left the blue leather binder on the kitchen counter when I visited for Thanksgiving. You took it, pitched it to Jamal's networking circle as your own brilliant idea, and used my intellectual property to launch your career. I stayed silent because Mom begged me not to ruin your big break. That is a lie, Madeline screamed, though her eyes darted nervously toward her husband and then toward our mother. It is fully documented, I stated evenly. And the absolute irony is, you could not even sustain the business without Jamal funneling stolen investor money into your accounts to buy fake followers and fake engagement metrics to make you look successful. Madeline's face crumpled. She stopped fighting the accusation. The fight drained out of her instantly. I did not know what I was doing, she sobbed the truth, finally spilling out in a pathetic, frantic rush in front of all 50 relatives. I just wanted Mom to be proud of me. You were always so smart, Lauren. You always figured things out effortlessly. I just wanted to be the successful daughter for once. But I do not even understand the marketing algorithms you wrote. I just hired cheap contractors to follow your binder step by step. And when the digital market shifted last year, I did not know how to pivot. That is why Jamal had to start transferring money from his crypto fund to keep my agency afloat. Without his stolen money, my business is completely bankrupt. I am a fraud, Lauren. The sheer entitlement of her confession was breathtaking. She had stolen my hard work, built a fake empire, lived off stolen funds, and her immediate reaction was to cry about wanting our mother's approval. I looked at her, searching for even a fraction of genuine remorse. There was none. She was only sorry that the money had run out and the audience was watching her fail. You stole my blueprint at Madeline, I said quietly, making sure my voice carried over her sobbing. But a blueprint is useless if you do not know how to build the house. When I realized that binder was gone, I did not cry to our parents. I knew they would just protect you like they always do. I sat down and built something entirely new. Something better. Something you could not steal because it required actual talent and relentless discipline. Harrison stood up, slamming his fists heavily onto the table. His face was flushed red with defensive rage. Lauren, that is enough. You are fabricating evidence and twisting words to destroy your sister's marriage because you are bitter and alone. You will show your family respect right this instant and apologize to your sister. Respect, I echoed, turning my gaze slowly to my father. Let us talk about your respect, Dad. Let us talk about the $80,000. I opened a new folder on my phone, pulling up a scanned financial document. The dominoes were falling exactly as I had planned, and it was time to topple the biggest one yet. I held the screen high so Harrison and Caroline could see it clearly. The bright backlight of my phone illuminated the undeniable proof of their financial treason. Harrison took a step forward, his chest puffed out in a desperate attempt to physically intimidate me. He used his deepest, most authoritative voice, the one he reserved for disciplining unruly employees or berating waiters who brought him the wrong vintage of wine. Put that phone away right now, Lauren Harrison commanded, pointing a thick finger at my face. Family finances are a private matter. You are violating the sanctity of this dinner. You have already caused a scene with Jamal and your sister. I will not allow you to disrespect your mother in front of our guests. Private, I repeated, raising an eyebrow. Dad, Mom just handed me a printed invoice for $80,000 in front of 50 people and threatened to banish me from the bloodline if I did not wire the funds in 48 hours. You lost the right to privacy the second she made this a public spectacle. Now we are going to look at the numbers. I tapped the screen, zooming in on the top of the document. This is a bank statement from 8 years ago, I announced, projecting my voice so that even the relatives at the far end of the long dining table could hear every single syllable. It is from a high-yield trust account, set up by Grandma Constance. An account specifically designated and legally protected as my college and professional development fund. Caroline visibly stiffened. Her impeccable posture suddenly looked rigid and brittle, like fragile glass ready to shatter. She gripped the back of her velvet dining chair, her knuckles turning bone white against the dark fabric. That was family money, Caroline interjected, her voice tight and defensive. You forfeited your right to that capital when you selfishly dropped out of your medical program. You abandoned your future. We merely reallocated the assets to better serve the family legacy. I dropped out of my medical program 10 years ago. I corrected her, my tone dropping to a glacial chill. This specific withdrawal was made 8 years ago. Exactly $80,000. It was withdrawn in a single cashier's check authorized and signed by you, Caroline. I pivoted my gaze back to Madeline, who was still slumped in her chair, wiping smeared mascara from her cheeks. The revelation of her husband's wire fraud had already broken her, but I needed to connect the final dots for the audience. Madeline, I said sharply, demanding her attention. Look at me. What kind of car did Mom and Dad buy you as a wedding present 8 years ago? Madeline blinked rapidly, looking frantically between me and our parents. She looked like a trapped animal. A car, she stammered, her voice shaking. They bought me a car. What kind of car, Madeline? I pressed, taking a step toward her. Say it out loud. A Porsche, she whispered, shrinking back into her seat. A white Porsche Macan. And do you know how much a fully loaded baseline Porsche Macan cost exactly 8 years ago? I asked. I did not wait for her to guess. I looked around the room, making eye contact with my aunts and uncles. $80,000, down to the absolute cent. A heavy, suffocating silence blanketed the room. The math was undeniably simple, and the 50 guests sitting at the table were doing it in their heads. This invoice, I said, picking up the ridiculous piece of paper my mother had dropped on my plate and waving it in the air. This invoice is not a penalty for my alleged failures. It is not about accountability or teaching me a lesson. It is a desperate, sloppy accounting trick. Harrison swallowed hard, the color draining from his face. Lauren, you do not understand estate management. We were legally entitled to manage those funds as your parents. You were legally obligated to manage them as fiduciaries, I fired back, quoting the exact legal terminology my corporate lawyers had taught me. But you did not manage them. You stole them. And you are only bringing this up today because Grandma Constance initiated a full comprehensive forensic audit of all her family trusts this month. Caroline gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Yes, Mom. I smiled, a cold and calculated expression. Grandma Constance called me last week. She asked for my signature to release the historical banking records for that specific trust. She is looking for the missing $80,000. You are terrified she is going to find out you embezzled your eldest daughter's college fund just to buy your favorite daughter a luxury sports car to maintain your fake wealthy image at the country club. The collective gasp from the room was palpable. Aunts whispered furiously to uncles. Cousins typed rapidly on their phones under the table. The waitstaff had completely stopped moving, standing frozen by the kitchen doors. You thought you could bully me into giving you the cash? I continued, stepping closer to Caroline. You thought you could publicly shame me into wiring you $80,000 today so you could quietly deposit it back into the trust account before the auditors finished their review on Monday morning. You needed a scapegoat to save yourselves from being charged with felony embezzlement. Harrison raised his hands, palms facing outward in a gesture of surrender. Lauren, please, keep your voice down. If your grandmother hears about this, she will cut us out of the main estate. She will ruin us. We just needed a short-term loan. We were going to pay you back once Jamal's crypto fund delivered its quarterly dividends. I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound that echoed off the crystal chandeliers. Jamal's crypto fund is a Ponzi scheme, Dad. There are no dividends. He is about to be indicted for wire fraud. You hitched your wagon to a sinking ship, and you burned my future to buy the tickets. Caroline's jaw dropped. She looked around the room, realizing that every single person she had invited to witness my humiliation was now witnessing her complete and utter destruction. She had severely underestimated me. For a decade, she had treated me like an emotional punching bag, assuming my silence was weakness, assuming my lack of a medical degree meant I was stupid. She never anticipated that I was simply gathering data, building my resources, and waiting for the exact right moment to strike. This is a lie, Caroline shrieked, abandoning all pretense of high society grace. Her voice was shrill, desperate, and ugly. You manipulated these documents. You hacked the bank just like you hacked Jamal's servers. You are trying to destroy this family because you have always been a bitter, jealous, antisocial outcast. You can shout all you want, Mom, I replied, sliding my phone back into my black clutch. The audit completes on Monday. Grandma Constance will have the official bank records straight from the source. You stole from a billionaire and you thought you could use me to cover your tracks. The illusion was dead. The wealthy, perfect family narrative was lying in pieces on the restaurant floor, shattered by undeniable financial facts. Harrison slumped into his chair, rubbing his face with trembling hands. Jamal was still staring at the wall, paralyzed by fear. Madeline was weeping into her hands, and Caroline was backed into a corner of her own making, stripped of her lies, her theft exposed for everyone to see. I stood tall, feeling the incredible weight of their judgment finally lift off my shoulders. I had not just defended myself, I had dismantled the entire toxic hierarchy that had suffocated me for my entire adult life. Caroline could not comprehend the reality of her defeat. Her perfectly manicured world was collapsing, and the architect of her destruction was the daughter she had spent 34 years treating like dirt. She started hyperventilating. Her chest heaved dramatically under her silk blouse, and her face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. The high society facade she had meticulously maintained for her country club friends completely melted away, leaving only a desperate, cornered predator. "You little ungrateful wretch," Caroline hissed, her voice vibrating with a primal fury. She lunged forward. Before anyone could intervene, she raised her hand and struck me across the face with all the force she could muster. The sharp crack of her palm connecting with my cheek echoed like a gunshot through the silent private dining room. My head snapped to the side. A sharp, stinging heat bloomed across my skin, but I planted my feet firmly. I did not stumble. I did not raise my hand to touch the red mark I knew was forming. I simply turned my head back and stared at her, utterly unfazed. The physical blow was nothing compared to the emotional beatings I had survived for years. It only proved I had won. "You are dead to me," Caroline spat, taking a frantic step backward, as if I were the one who had just committed violence. "You are a cancer to this family. I will not let you ruin us with your fabricated digital lies." Her hands shook violently as she dug into her designer purse. She yanked out her smartphone, her fingers slipping against the glass screen. She snatched the $80,000 invoice off the table, flattened it out, and held her phone over it. The camera flash blinded me for a split second as she took a photograph of the ridiculous extortion demand. "I will show everyone exactly what kind of monster you are," she panted, her eyes wide and manic as she opened her email application. "I am sending this to every single person in our contacts. Everyone in this room. Everyone who could not make it today. You are cut off, Lauren. Completely and permanently." I watched her thumbs fly across the digital keyboard. She selected a pre-existing mailing list, adding all 50 relatives sitting in the room to the recipient line. She typed the subject line in all capital letters, reading it aloud as she hammered the keys. "The betrayal of a daughter." She attached the photograph of the invoice. Her breathing was ragged, her entire body trembling with the adrenaline of her own manufactured victimhood. She truly believed that clicking send would rally the troops. She thought this digital excommunication would force me to crumble and beg for mercy. She held her thumb hovering just millimeters above the send button, waiting for my apology. "Do it," I whispered, my voice dark and lethal. "Send it, Mom. Make it digital. Make it permanent." Caroline did not hesitate. Her thumb struck the screen with enough force to crack the glass. A sharp digital swoosh echoed in the quiet room, confirming the message had left her outbox. For a fraction of a second, the dining room remained perfectly still. Then the digital avalanche began. A synchronized wave of chimes, aggressive vibrations, and custom notification tones erupted down the length of the massive dining table. 50 smartphones lit up simultaneously in pockets, designer purses, and resting on the white tablecloths. Aunts, uncles, and distant cousins instinctually reached for their devices. I watched their expressions morph as they opened the email. The harsh glow of their screens illuminated their faces, reflecting a mixture of shock, morbid curiosity, and profound discomfort. They were reading the subject line Caroline had typed in frantic all-capital letters. They were staring at the crisp photograph of the $80,000 invoice she had just tried to extort from me. Caroline stood tall at the head of the table, her chest heaving with the adrenaline of her own manufactured victimhood. A twisted, triumphant smile crept onto her lips. She truly believed she had won. She thought that weaponizing the entire extended family would shame me into submission. She expected me to collapse, to apologize, to beg her not to cut me out of this toxic bloodline. I did not offer her a single tear. I did not give her a dramatic parting speech or scream about the injustice of it all. The evidence I had dumped on the table regarding Jamal's wire fraud and the stolen college fund was already doing the heavy lifting for me. I offered my mother a single polite, chilling smile. I picked up my simple black clutch, turned on my heel, and walked away. I navigated through the labyrinth of tables in the main dining area, feeling the burning stares of my relatives boring into my back. Harrison did not call after me. Jamal remained frozen in his chair, completely paralyzed by the impending federal investigation. Madeline was still sobbing into her hands, mourning her fake influencer lifestyle. I pushed open the heavy brass doors of the Michelin star restaurant and stepped out into the crisp, cool evening air of Seattle. The transition from the stifling, perfume-heavy atmosphere of the private dining room to the fresh city breeze was incredibly refreshing. The tension in my shoulders began to release. I walked over to the valet stand and handed the attendant my ticket. He smiled politely, disappearing down the block to retrieve my vehicle. I stood alone on the sidewalk, taking a deep, cleansing breath. The emotional warfare was officially over. I had survived the ambush. Now it was time for the digital execution. Minutes later, a sleek, armored black Audi pulled up to the curb. It was not a flashy luxury vehicle meant to attract attention or project fake wealth. It was a fortress on wheels designed for absolute security and discretion, and it was completely paid off. The valet opened the door for me. I handed him a crisp $20 bill, thanked him, and slipped into the driver's seat. I pulled the heavy door shut. It closed with a solid, satisfying thud that instantly blocked out the ambient noise of the city traffic. The cabin of the Audi was a sanctuary of quiet leather and soft blue dashboard lights. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. The adrenaline that had carried me through the explosive dinner confrontation was beginning to fade. In its place, a sharp, calculating focus took over. My mind shifted from defensive survival mode to offensive strategy. I reached over and opened the spacious center console. I retrieved my high-performance laptop, resting it carefully against the steering wheel. The screen glowed to life in the dark cabin, casting a pale light across my face. I bypassed the standard biometric login screens and connected directly to my heavily encrypted mobile hotspot. I did not open my personal email client right away. I did not need to see the replies or the frantic group chat messages that were undoubtedly flooding my phone. Let them panic. Let them digest the reality of the stolen college fund and the cryptocurrency Ponzi scheme. I had bigger moves to make. Instead of checking my inbox, I navigated to the secure back-end of my corporate asset management portal. This was the digital nerve center of the wealth I had built entirely in secret over the last 10 years. I bypassed my main enterprise accounts, the ones holding the $75 million acquisition funds, and scrolled down to a specific isolated entity, Phoenix Holdings LLC. I clicked on the folder. The screen populated with legal deeds, tax records, and bank routing numbers. To understand the true power of Phoenix Holdings, you had to look back exactly 3 years. Caroline and Harrison had spent decades living far beyond their means to maintain their fraudulent status at the country club. They took out second and third mortgages to fund luxury vacations, designer wardrobes, and massive injections of cash into Jamal's failing business ventures. Eventually, the bill came due. They defaulted on their massive $5 million estate. The bank initiated aggressive foreclosure proceedings. Caroline was days away from having her designer luggage tossed onto the street by the local sheriff. It was a social humiliation she would not have survived. Then, a mysterious corporate investor swooped in, purchasing the property entirely in cash directly from the bank. This faceless, limited liability company offered my parents a highly generous lease agreement, allowing them to remain in the home and save face. Caroline and Harrison bragged to the entire family that an anonymous admirer of Harrison's business acumen had bailed them out. They had no idea the anonymous admirer was the daughter they constantly belittled. I bought my childhood home through Phoenix Holdings to prevent them from becoming homeless. I charged them a fraction of the market rent, asking only that they cover the basic property taxes and maintenance. But Caroline and Harrison were entitled. Over the past 14 months, they had stopped paying even that heavily discounted rent. They ignored the notices from the property management company, assuming the faceless corporate landlord would not bother evicting them because Harrison kept promising a massive payout from Jamal's crypto fund. I pulled up the corporate ledger on my screen. I highlighted the outstanding balance for the past 14 months of unpaid rent. The total arrears amounted to exactly $80,000. The poetry of that number was almost too perfect. The sheer hubris of Caroline trying to extort $80,000 from me for being a failure while she secretly owed me the exact same amount just to keep a roof over her head. It was time to close the account. I prepared to launch the final strike. I stared at the glowing digits on my laptop screen. $80,000. Caroline had weaponized that exact number to publicly shame me, unaware that it was the precise measure of her own financial delinquency. She had sent that email to 50 people attempting to destroy my reputation and isolate me from the family tree. She wanted a digital record of my supposed failure. I was going to give her a digital record she would never, ever forget. I minimized the accounting ledger and opened the legal document repository. It was time to gather the necessary attachments. The engine of the Audi hummed softly beneath me, a steady, grounding vibration that matched my heartbeat. I cracked my knuckles adjusting the screen angle. The trap had been set for 14 months. Caroline had just willingly walked right into it, handed me the remote detonator, and dared me to press the button. I took one last deep breath of the quiet air inside my car. The war was no longer happening in the restaurant. It was happening right here on my keyboard. I opened my email client, watching Caroline's frantic message sitting at the very top of my inbox. The subject line glared at me in bold text: "The betrayal of a daughter." I clicked open the message, shaking my head at the sheer theatricality of it all. Caroline had typed a 3-paragraph manifesto detailing my supposed financial ruin, my jealousy of Madeline, and my unforgivable disrespect toward the family hierarchy. She attached the photograph of that laughable $80,000 invoice, demanding that the 50 relatives on the chain cut all ties with me immediately. It was a digital witch hunt, orchestrated by a woman who had absolutely no idea she was holding a match inside a powder keg. I did not draft a reply right away. Instead, I minimized the email client and opened a highly secured financial dashboard. The screen authenticated my biometric scan, bypassing layers of enterprise-grade encryption. The interface loaded, displaying my consolidated global assets. The bold green numbers at the top of the screen read $75 million in liquid capital. This was the direct result of the Silicon Valley acquisition I had closed just 14 days prior. My software platform, the one Jamal had dismissed as resetting passwords, was now integrated into half the Fortune 500 companies in North America. But liquid cash was only one fraction of my portfolio. I clicked a secondary tab, revealing a network of limited liability companies, real estate trusts, and diversified angel investments. I was not just a tech founder anymore. I was an institutional investor. I had quietly built a fortress of wealth, while Caroline and Harrison burned through their savings trying to impress people who secretly despised them. I scrolled slowly down the entire list of my corporate entities until I located the file for Phoenix Holdings, LLC. This was the holding company I had formed exactly 36 months ago for one highly specific, deeply personal purpose. I double-clicked the folder. The screen populated with a digital archive of legal deeds, property tax receipts, and residential lease agreements. At the very top of the list was the property profile for a sprawling 6-bedroom estate located in one of Seattle's most exclusive gated country club communities. It featured a grand marble foyer, a heated infinity pool, and a custom wine cellar. It was the exact house where Caroline hosted her lavish holiday parties. It was the house where I had grown up and the house where she had continually told me I would never amount to anything. 3 years ago, Harrison's desperate attempts to keep up appearances had caught up with him. He had taken out a third mortgage to cover his mounting debts and to blindly fund Jamal's early catastrophic cryptocurrency ventures. Predictably, the bank initiated a brutal foreclosure. Caroline was weeks away from having her imported Italian furniture dragged out onto the curb by the King County Sheriff. In her social circle, public foreclosure was a fate worse than death. She would have been blacklisted from the country club and completely ostracized by her wealthy friends. That was when Phoenix Holdings stepped in. Acting through a network of aggressive corporate attorneys, I purchased the entire estate in a direct cash buyout from the bank. The transaction was completely blind. Caroline and Harrison were informed that an anonymous corporate investor had acquired the property and was willing to offer them a highly subsidized lease agreement. They eagerly signed the paperwork, bragging to all 50 of our relatives that a mystery billionaire had recognized Harrison's vast business potential and bailed them out. They never suspected that the mystery billionaire was the daughter they mockingly referred to as the IT support girl. For 3 years, they lived in my house. I charged them a fraction of the market rent, barely enough to cover the property taxes and the landscaping fees. I did it because despite their toxicity, I did not want to see my parents homeless on the streets of Seattle. But Caroline's entitlement knew no bounds. 14 months ago, the rental payments suddenly stopped. She and Harrison decided that paying their anonymous corporate landlord was no longer a priority. They ignored the formal delinquency notices, ignored the warnings from the property management firm, and assumed they were untouchable because Harrison firmly believed Jamal's crypto fund would soon deliver a massive 8-figure dividend. They treated my leniency as weakness. I opened the ledger for the property. I highlighted the columns showing the missed payments. 14 months of defaulted rent, accumulated late fees, and unpaid property taxes. The total outstanding balance sat at exactly $80,000. The staggering irony of that number made me smile in the quiet, dark cabin of my car. Caroline had just stood in a Michelin-starred restaurant, handed me an $80,000 invoice for being a failure, and threatened to ruin my life if I did not pay it. She had weaponized that exact sum to publicly humiliate me, completely oblivious to the fact that she owed me that precise amount just to keep a roof over her head. I tapped the touchpad, opening the official property deed. The county seal glowed on my screen, legally certifying Phoenix Holdings, LLC, as the sole owner of the estate. Then I opened the corporate registry documents, providing irrefutable legal proof that Lauren is the sole proprietor and managing director of Phoenix Holdings. There were no loopholes. There was absolutely no ambiguity. I owned the walls, the roof, and the ground beneath Caroline's feet. I dragged the downloaded PDF files directly onto my desktop. These were not just legal documents. They were the ultimate instruments of accountability. Caroline wanted to create a written record of my failure to share with 50 relatives. I was going to give her a written record she would never be able to erase. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had completely inverted. I was no longer the outcast daughter begging for a seat at the table. I was the landlord, and the rent was now entirely past due. I clicked the Reply All button. The recipient list instantly expanded across the top of my screen, a dense block of text containing the digital addresses of every single relative sitting in that private dining room, plus a few dozen more who had been spared the physical dinner, but were now front-row spectators to the digital slaughter. 50 names, 50 people who had spent the last decade whispering behind my back, pitying me, or outright ignoring my existence because I did not fit into Caroline's curated country club fantasy. Before typing a single word, I took a moment to actually read the manic manifesto my mother had blasted out to the family. The subject line, "The betrayal of a daughter," was just the beginning. The body of the email was a masterclass in narcissistic manipulation. Caroline painted herself as a weeping, long-suffering martyr who had sacrificed everything for an ungrateful, unstable child. She claimed I had arrived at the Michelin-starred restaurant in a fit of jealous rage, desperate to ruin Madeline's influencer career because I was entirely broke and living in squalor. She wrote that the $80,000 invoice was a desperate attempt to teach me financial responsibility after I had allegedly demanded money from her and Harrison. It was a complete, fabricated inversion of reality. She ended the email by formally excommunicating me and demanding that the rest of the family block my number to protect themselves from my supposed toxicity. I felt no anger reading her lies. Anger requires an emotional investment I no longer possessed. I only felt a cold, clinical satisfaction. She had dug her own grave, climbed inside, and handed me the shovel. I moved my cursor to the attachment icon. It was time to upload the payload. First, I dragged and dropped the official warranty deed from King County. The document was a high-resolution scan complete with the blue ink stamps and the raised seal of the county clerk. It detailed the transaction from 3 years ago, showing the transfer of the $5 million estate from the foreclosing bank directly to Phoenix Holdings, LLC. It listed the exact address of the sprawling 6-bedroom mansion where Caroline currently slept. There was no mortgage attached. The document proved the property was owned outright, purchased in cold hard cash. Second, I selected the corporate registration documents from the Secretary of State. This was the undeniable link between the faceless corporate landlord and the daughter they had just publicly humiliated. The certificate of formation clearly stated the name of the LLC, but more importantly, the operating agreement explicitly named me as the sole managing member and 100% equity owner. There were no silent partners, there was no board of directors, there was only me. I dragged the file into the email. The attachment bar loaded a small green progress line inching toward completion. Third, I uploaded the residential lease agreement. It bore Caroline and Harrison's physical signatures at the bottom of the final page, right next to the signature of my corporate attorney acting as a proxy for Phoenix Holdings. The lease outlined the heavily subsidized monthly rent I had graciously offered them to keep them from becoming homeless. Fourth, and perhaps most devastatingly, I attached the official accounting ledger for the property. I had my financial team highlight the final column in bright yellow. It showed 14 consecutive months of missed payments, ignored late fees, and defaulted property taxes that I had been forced to cover out of my own pocket. The bold number at the very bottom of the ledger was impossible to misinterpret. The total outstanding debt was exactly $80,000. I stared at the 4 attachments sitting in the draft window. They were absolute, irrefutable proof of reality. They shattered the illusion of Harrison's wealth. They exposed Caroline as a fraudulent squatter living on the charity of the child she despised. Finally, I placed my cursor in the main text box. A response to a 50-person email chain required absolute precision. I did not want to sound defensive. I did not want to sound emotional, angry, or vindictive. I needed to sound like an executioner reading a verdict. I let my fingers hover over the backlit keyboard for a fraction of a second before I began to type. I started with a simple, formal greeting. To Caroline and the extended family. I hit the enter key twice, creating a crisp visual break. The attached invoice for $80,000 has been received and reviewed. Coincidentally, this fabricated penalty perfectly matches the exact outstanding balance on your residential lease agreement. For the past 14 months, you and Harrison have defaulted on your rent at the estate you currently occupy. I paused, making sure the rhythm of the words hit exactly right. I continued typing, the rhythmic clacking of the keys filling the quiet interior of my armored Audi. 3 years ago, when the bank foreclosed on your home due to massive financial insolvency and Jamal's failed investments, you told this family an anonymous billionaire saved you. Please refer to the attached corporate ownership documents. I am Phoenix Holdings, LLC. I bought your debt. I own your house. I subsidized your lifestyle to save you from public humiliation. I leaned back against the leather headrest, reading the paragraph over. It was devastatingly concise. I leaned forward to type the final lethal blow. You demanded $80,000 today under the guise of accountability. I accept your terms. Because you have publicly severed our relationship, my charity has officially concluded. Your outstanding rental debt of $80,000 is now due in full. Furthermore, because you have established that we are no longer family, I am proceeding with standard corporate protocol for delinquent tenants. I had one last document to attach, the final nail in the coffin. I opened the folder containing the legal actions my lawyers had executed just minutes before the dinner began. I dragged the King County Sheriff's eviction notice into the email. I typed the final sentence. An official notice of eviction has been processed. The authorities have posted the mandate on your front door. You have 72 hours to vacate my property. Sincerely, the IT support girl. I read the entire draft from top to bottom. It was a masterpiece of corporate retaliation. It addressed every lie Caroline had told, backed up every claim with legally binding documentation, and delivered a consequence so catastrophic it would permanently alter the family hierarchy. There was no room for debate. There was no room for Caroline to spin a new narrative or play the victim. The math was perfect. The legal standing was absolute. I moved the cursor over the blue send button. My heart beat with a steady, powerful rhythm. The dark cabin of the car felt like a war room. I had gathered the deeds, compiled the LLC documentation, and drafted the ultimate response. The trap was fully armed, the evidence was loaded, and the target was locked. All that remained was the execution. I pressed down on the trackpad. The click was sharp and definitive. A tiny loading wheel appeared on the screen for a fraction of a second as the server processed the heavy PDF attachments. Then the window vanished. The satisfying digital swoosh confirmed that the message had successfully left my outbox. The email was gone. It was hurtling through cyberspace, delivering absolute financial ruin straight into the pockets and purses of 50 unsuspecting relatives. I sat back and exhaled. For 10 years I had carried the heavy burden of their shame. I had let them convince me that I was the flawed one, the broken branch on an otherwise perfect family tree. I had absorbed their mockery and swallowed my pride to keep the peace. With one single click of a button, I had transferred all that shame right back to where it belonged. The crushing weight was entirely lifted off my shoulders. I felt lighter than air. I closed the laptop. The glowing screen snapped to black, plunging the cabin of my car into comfortable darkness. I placed the computer securely back inside the center console and locked it. Outside the tinted windows of my vehicle, the city of Seattle continued its evening routine. Pedestrians walked briskly past the glowing storefronts. Taxis rolled down the wet asphalt. None of them knew that a massive social detonation was currently unfolding just 50 yards away, behind the heavy brass doors of the Michelin-starred restaurant. I leaned my head against the plush leather headrest and simply listened to the quiet hum of my engine. I pictured the exact sequence of events happening inside that private dining room. I imagined the synchronized buzzing of 50 smartphones. I pictured Caroline standing triumphantly at the head of the table, her smug smile freezing as she checked her own screen. I envisioned the collective gasp as aunts, uncles, and cousins opened the attachments and stared at the undeniable legal proof of my parents' bankruptcy, their lies, and their impending eviction. The truth is a terrifying weapon when deployed against people who have built their entire existence on a foundation of lies. They had demanded transparency and accountability. I had delivered it in the most brutal, legally binding format possible. There was absolutely no way to gaslight their way out of county court documents and property deeds. The illusion was dead. I reached out and shifted the car into drive. I did not need to stick around to watch the physical fallout. The blast radius was already contained within their digital inboxes. I merged smoothly into the evening traffic, leaving the restaurant and the remnants of my toxic family far behind me in the rearview mirror. I drove toward my downtown penthouse with a clear mind and a steady heartbeat, fully prepared for the hurricane of consequences that would inevitably touch down tomorrow morning. I knew my phone would start to ring very soon, but I would not answer. Let them drown in the deafening, undeniable silence. As I merged onto the interstate, the heavy silence inside my Audi was broken by the sharp, rapid-fire chiming of my phone. I had placed it in the passenger seat. I did not intend to answer any calls, but my curiosity regarding the immediate blast radius was undeniable. I tapped the console screen, syncing the device to my car audio system. I did not pick up the incoming calls, but I allowed the live voicemails to play directly through the surround sound speakers. This gave me a front row seat to the exact moment my email detonated inside that private dining room. Through the crisp audio connection, I heard the initial synchronized wave of notifications. It started as a chorus of confused murmurs. I heard the clinking of silverware stopping abruptly. I heard my Aunt Beatrice ask what on earth Caroline had sent. Then came the heavy, suffocating silence that I had meticulously engineered. It was a vacuum completely devoid of oxygen. I could hear the faint ambient jazz music of the restaurant playing in the background, contrasting violently with the shock radiating from 50 different people staring at their screens. The first voice to break the silence was my Uncle David. He was a retired accountant, a man who lived and breathed financial documentation. I heard him adjust his glasses, his voice cutting through the quiet like a serrated blade. He read the subject line out loud, then moved straight to the attachments. There was a sharp intake of breath. He announced to the table that he was looking at a certified warranty deed from King County. He read the address. He read the purchase price of $5 million paid in cash. And then he read the name of the purchasing entity, Phoenix Holdings, LLC. Caroline tried to interrupt him. Through the speakers, her voice sounded thin, frantic, and entirely stripped of her usual country club arrogance. She demanded that everyone put their phones away. She insisted it was a fabricated digital attack, a malicious hack designed by a bitter daughter. She told them to delete the message immediately. But nobody listened to her. The authority she had wielded for decades was completely gone, evaporated by undeniable stamped legal proof. Uncle David ignored her protests and opened the second attachment. He read the corporate registry details out loud, his voice steady and clinical. He announced that the sole proprietor of Phoenix Holdings was Lauren. I heard a collective gasp from the cousins and aunts. The realization hit them like a physical blow. The anonymous billionaire investor they had spent 3 years worshipping was the exact same woman they had just allowed Caroline to publicly humiliate and banish. Then came the third attachment. Someone, I think it was my cousin Mark, read the rental ledger. He recited the numbers. 14 months of missed payments, ignored late fees, defaulted property taxes. He reached the bottom line and announced the total outstanding debt. $80,000. The irony hung heavily over the room. I could hear the shifting of chairs as people physically distanced themselves from my parents. Harrison tried to speak, but his words stumbled over each other. He attempted to explain that it was a temporary cash flow issue that was going to be handled once Jamal released his crypto dividends. The mention of Jamal only ignited a new wave of outrage. The relatives who had invested in Jamal's fraudulent fund began shouting. They demanded to know where their retirement money had gone. But the absolute peak of the audio broadcast came when Uncle David opened the final attachment. He raised his voice over the escalating chaos, demanding silence. The room quieted down, gripped by the morbid fascination of a car crash. Uncle David began to read the King County Sheriff eviction notice word for word. He read the formal legal header. He read the specific statutes citing severe financial delinquency and breach of lease. He read the mandate authorizing law enforcement to physically remove the tenants and all their belongings from the premises. He read the final devastating ultimatum: 72 hours to vacate the property or face forcible removal and property seizure. The reaction was explosive. Caroline let out a sound that was half shriek and half sob. It was the sound of a woman watching her entire identity burn to ash. She realized that not only was she utterly bankrupt, but she was going to be homeless in exactly 3 days. The sheriff was going to show up at her front door in broad daylight, in the middle of her prestigious gated community, and drag her imported furniture onto the lawn. Her social death was guaranteed. Harrison began to panic. I heard him begging Uncle David for a loan, pleading with the aunts and uncles to pool some money together to cover the $80,000 debt so they could negotiate a stay of eviction. The response from the family was brutal and immediate. Voices overlapped in a chorus of absolute rejection. They called Harrison a parasite. They called Caroline a manipulative thief. They demanded to know how my parents could steal an $80,000 college fund from their own child, use it to buy a sports car, and then try to extort that exact same amount from that same child to cover their unpaid rent. Madeline tried to scream over the noise, crying about her ruined reputation, but her cries were drowned out by the fury of 50 betrayed relatives. I listened to the symphony of their destruction as I drove through the neon-lit streets of downtown Seattle. The grand Mother's Day dinner had officially devolved into a mass exodus. I kept my eyes on the road, my hands resting lightly on the leather steering wheel. I felt no guilt. They had built their own cages, forged the locks, and handed me the key. I simply locked the door, threw the key into the ocean, and walked away. The audio feed coming through my car speakers shifted from a chaotic roar of 50 angry relatives to a sharp, high-pitched wheezing. It was Caroline. The invincible matriarch of our family was hyperventilating. I could hear the desperate, ragged gasps for air as she struggled to draw oxygen into her lungs. She was experiencing a full-blown panic attack right in the middle of the Michelin-starred dining room. The realization that she was no longer a wealthy socialite, but a fraud facing immediate eviction, had finally broken her psychological defenses. Her mind simply could not process the magnitude of her social execution. She tried to speak, but her words came out as frantic, disjointed sobs. She kept repeating that there had to be a mistake, that the bank must have made an error, completely ignoring the fact that the bank had not owned the property for 3 years. I owned it, and I did not make errors. Beside her, the reality of the situation was crashing down on Harrison with the weight of a freight train. For his entire adult life, my father had relied on a combination of blind luck, empty charisma, and Caroline's relentless social climbing to keep himself afloat. He had always managed to find a loophole or a bailout. But as Uncle David's voice cut through Caroline's sobbing, rereading the 72-hour mandate on the King County eviction notice, Harrison hit a solid brick wall. There were no loopholes in a sheriff's mandate. The document was absolute. I heard the exact moment Harrison realized he was effectively homeless. His voice trembled as he asked Uncle David to read the date on the notice again. When Uncle David confirmed that the 72-hour countdown had officially started the moment the notice was posted on their front door earlier that evening, Harrison let out a sound of pure, unadulterated despair. He realized they did not even have the weekend to pack. By Tuesday morning, armed deputies would be standing on their pristine, manicured lawn, forcibly removing them from the premises. Panic breeds desperation, and desperation destroys loyalty. The united front my parents had presented just 20 minutes prior completely evaporated. Harrison turned on Caroline with a viciousness I had never heard him use before. Through the speakers, his voice boomed over the remaining relatives. He demanded to know why she had pushed the issue tonight. He screamed that they could have just kept quiet, kept their heads down, and figured out a way to placate the anonymous landlord. He blamed her obsession with humiliating me for triggering the audit of their entire lives. "You just had to hand her that stupid invoice," Harrison bellowed, his voice cracking with panic. "You could not just eat your dinner and smile. You had to make a show of it. Now we have nowhere to go, Caroline. We have no money, no credit, and no house. We are on the street because you wanted to play God with an $80,000 piece of paper." Caroline, gasping for breath, fired back with equal venom. She blamed him for losing the $5 million estate in the first place. She shrieked that if he had been a real man, a real provider, they never would have faced foreclosure 3 years ago. She reminded him loudly that it was his brilliant idea to sink their remaining equity into Jamal's fraudulent crypto fund. They were tearing each other apart, stripping away decades of marital solidarity in front of their siblings and cousins. The polished, wealthy couple who hosted lavish Thanksgiving dinners and posed for country club newsletters was dead. In their place stood 2 terrified, bankrupt squatters fighting over the ashes of their own manufactured ruin. Aunts and uncles began quietly gathering their coats, desperate to escape the blast radius of this toxic implosion. The sound of chairs pushing back and hushed goodbyes filtered through the audio, signaling the mass exodus of our bloodline. I drove steadily down the interstate, listening to the spectacular collapse of their empire. I kept my breathing slow and measured. This was the raw, unfiltered truth of the people who had raised me. Without their money and their fabricated status, there was nothing left but bitterness and blame. They did not care about the betrayal of stealing my college fund. They did not care about the emotional damage they had inflicted on me for a decade. They only cared about their impending loss of shelter and the absolute destruction of their public image. I signaled and took the exit toward my downtown neighborhood. The streetlights washed over the hood of my car, illuminating the path forward. I felt an incredible sense of clarity. Every decision I had made, every long night I had spent building my software company, every ounce of restraint I had exercised while they mocked my career, it had all culminated in this perfectly executed symphony of consequences. The 72-hour window was a brilliant legal mechanism. I had consulted extensively with my corporate attorneys to ensure the timing was flawless. By serving the notice on a Friday evening, I effectively paralyzed their ability to mount any kind of immediate legal defense. The courts were closed for the weekend, the banks were closed. Their usual avenues for securing emergency bridge loans or filing frivolous appeals were completely inaccessible until Monday morning. And by Monday morning, they would only have 24 hours left before the sheriff arrived. They were trapped in a logistical nightmare of their own making. I heard Madeline's voice cutting into the argument, begging her parents to stop fighting. She asked if they could just go back to the house and pack their valuables. Harrison quickly shut her down, pointing out that they could not even afford a moving company on short notice, let alone a climate-controlled storage unit large enough to hold a $5 million estate's worth of imported Italian leather furniture and custom artwork. The realization that they were going to lose their physical possessions as well as the house sent Caroline into another spiral of hyperventilation. I reached out and tapped the console screen, ending the live audio feed. The car was instantly filled with the soothing, quiet hum of the engine. I had heard enough. The initial shockwave had done its job. The reality of their homelessness was firmly established in their minds, and the family had witnessed their unmasking. Tomorrow would bring a new phase of desperation, but tonight belonged entirely to me. I pulled into the secure underground parking garage of my luxury high-rise building, the heavy steel gates closing behind me, sealing out the chaos of the world they were currently drowning in. The elevator doors slid open, granting me direct access to my top-floor penthouse. I stepped out of the private vestibule and into the expansive open-concept living area. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Seattle skyline, the city lights reflecting off the dark waters of Puget Sound. The environment was a stark contrast to the chaotic battlefield I had just left behind. There was no screaming here. There was only the quiet, efficient hum of the climate control system and the satisfying weight of total victory. I walked over to the marble kitchen island, poured myself a glass of iced water, and placed my laptop on the counter. The screen illuminated instantly. I had expected the night to conclude with my parents realizing their impending homelessness. I had underestimated the sheer desperate arrogance of my brother-in-law. The email client showed a massive influx of activity on the original chain. While Caroline and Harrison were busy tearing each other apart in the middle of the restaurant, Jamal had apparently found a quiet corner to mount a digital counteroffensive. He had replied to all 50 recipients with a lengthy jargon, heavy manifesto designed to discredit me and stop the hemorrhaging of his investor capital. I clicked on his message, reading the desperate lies he was trying to feed our terrified relatives. Jamal wrote that my entire email was a sophisticated cyber attack. He claimed that I was a bitter, disgruntled hacker who had fabricated the legal documents using artificial intelligence. He told the family that Phoenix Holdings LLC was actually a subsidiary corporate entity that he had established through his cryptocurrency fund to manage the family estate. He promised the aunts and uncles that their retirement investments were completely secure, locked safely in cold storage wallets offshore. He insisted that the eviction notice was a childish prank and urged everyone to remain calm while he contacted his legal team to file a restraining order against me. He ended his pathetic message by stating he possessed the true collateral deeds, proving his ownership of the property. It was a bold, incredibly stupid move. Jamal was banking on the fact that our older relatives did not understand corporate law or blockchain technology. He was trying to blind them with financial buzzwords, hoping they would trust the man in the tailored suit over the daughter who wore casual clothes to family gatherings. He wanted to play a game of digital chicken. He had absolutely no idea he was driving a golf cart into a tank. I did not feel a single ounce of panic. I set my water glass down and cracked my knuckles. If Jamal wanted to discuss collateral and corporate structure in front of the entire family, I was more than happy to oblige. I navigated to my secure server, bypassing the basic firewalls and entering the heavily encrypted directory, where I stored the forensic accounting data I had compiled on his fraudulent fund. I opened the first file. It was a scanned copy of a commercial loan origination document from an unregulated offshore shadow bank. 3 months ago, when Jamal lost his initial liquidity pool in a disastrous margin trade, he became desperate for cash to keep his Ponzi scheme afloat. He needed a massive injection of capital to pay off his early investors and keep the illusion alive. To secure that loan, he needed collateral. He used the $5 million estate my parents lived in. The problem was Jamal did not own the estate, I did. But Jamal had forged the property deed, completely falsifying the county clerk stamps and forging Harrison's signature as a guarantor. He submitted these fabricated documents across state lines to secure a $5 million wire transfer. It was a textbook definition of federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. I downloaded the forged loan application, highlighting the fake signatures and the fraudulent collateral claims in bright yellow. Then I opened my blockchain analysis software. Jamal loved to brag about the anonymity of cryptocurrency, completely ignoring the fact that blockchain ledgers are permanent public records. You just need to know how to read the data. I had spent a weekend mapping his entire financial network. I exported a highly detailed, incredibly clear flowchart. It tracked the movement of funds from the moment the aunts and uncles wired their retirement savings into his primary account. The chart showed the money bypassing any legitimate investment vehicles. Instead, the red arrows traced the funds flowing directly into a series of shell wallets. From those shell wallets, the money was converted back into fiat currency and deposited straight into Madeline's personal checking accounts to fund her fake influencer lifestyle. Other arrows pointed to luxury car dealerships, high-end jewelry stores, and the exact merchant account where Jamal had purchased the Birkin bag earlier that day. I drafted my response directly in the main email thread. I did not use capital letters or exclamation points. The cold, hard data did not need emotional formatting. I wrote to Jamal and the family. Jamal claims to own the estate as collateral. Attached is the fraudulent loan application Jamal submitted to an offshore bank 90 days ago. He forged Harrison's signature and falsified a county deed to secure $5 million in illegal margin loans using a property he does not own. This constitutes federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. I paused, ensuring the rhythm was clinical and absolute. I added the next paragraph. Jamal claims your investments are safe in cold storage. Attached is a certified forensic blockchain audit. It traces every single dollar invested by this family. Your retirement funds were never invested. They were routed directly into Madeline's personal checking accounts and used to purchase luxury goods, including the handbag gifted today. This is the definition of a Ponzi scheme. All digital evidence has been timestamped and preserved. I attached the forged loan documents and the devastating blockchain flowchart. Jamal thought he could bluff his way out of a financial massacre using big words and a fake smile. He had just forced my hand, requiring me to drop the exact evidence that would guarantee he spent the next 20 years in a federal penitentiary. I moved my cursor over the send button. The penthouse was completely silent, isolated from the noise of the city far below. I pressed the trackpad. The attachments loaded swiftly, and the message vanished from my screen, deploying the final lethal strike directly into the inbox of every single family member who had ever trusted him. Within seconds of the email landing, the digital landscape completely shifted. My phone began to vibrate violently on the marble counter, but it was not Jamal responding. The counterattack had utterly failed. I had dropped the nuclear option, exposing the wire fraud and the forged collateral evidence in a way that left absolutely no room for interpretation. The family was no longer confused. They were no longer waiting for Harrison to take control or for Caroline to explain the situation away. They were looking at undeniable proof that their favorite son-in-law had stolen their life savings to buy sports cars and designer bags. The final pillar of my parents' fake empire had just been pulverized into dust. The final pillar of my parents' fake empire had just been pulverized into dust. I sat at my kitchen island, watching the screen of my laptop as the digital shockwave ripped through the family hierarchy. For a full 60 seconds, my inbox was entirely still. It was the digital equivalent of a bomb sucking all the oxygen out of a room before the blast. Then the floodgates opened. My screen became a cascading waterfall of frantic replies, all capital letters, and furious demands for answers. Uncle David was the first to hit reply all. His message was brief, brutal, and entirely stripped of his usual polite demeanor. He wrote that he was calling the federal authorities the moment he stepped out of the restaurant. He attached a screenshot of his own bank records showing a $200,000 transfer to Jamal's fund from his retirement savings. He demanded that Jamal and Harrison explain themselves immediately or face criminal charges. Within seconds, Aunt Beatrice chimed in. She replied to the entire thread, stating that she and her husband were leaving the dinner right now and that they would be speaking to their attorneys in the morning. She explicitly called Caroline a monster for facilitating a scam that targeted her own blood relatives. I picked up my phone and opened the massive family group chat that Caroline had meticulously curated for years. She used it exclusively to post heavily filtered photos of her country club lunches and Madeline's fake influencer brand deals. I watched the screen as the systemic dismantling of her social circle happened in real time. The green text bubbles, usually filled with heart emojis and forced compliments, were replaced by stark automated system notifications. Uncle David has left the group. Aunt Beatrice has left the group. Cousin Michael has left the group. The notifications began scrolling down my screen faster than I could read them. It was a digital stampede. Every single person who had sat at that long, elegant table was rushing for the exits, desperately trying to sever any ties to the sinking ship that was my parents' life. They realized that Caroline and Harrison were not just innocent victims of a bad investment. The forged collateral documents proved that my parents had actively participated in Jamal's fraud to maintain their own lavish lifestyle. They had sacrificed the entire family's financial security to keep their leased mansion and their imported luxury cars. I imagined the physical scene playing out in the Michelin-starred dining room. I pictured 50 people abruptly standing up from their half-eaten truffle duck and expensive wine. I envisioned the scraping of heavy wooden chairs, the frantic collecting of coats, and the absolute refusal to look Caroline or Harrison in the eye. They were fleeing the restaurant, abandoning the Mother's Day celebration in a wave of profound disgust. Nobody was staying to comfort Madeline. Nobody was offering to help Harrison navigate his impending homelessness. They were leaving the four of them completely isolated in the center of the room, surrounded by the wreckage of their own deceit. My phone vibrated violently against the marble countertop. An incoming call from Caroline. I declined it instantly. It immediately rang again. I declined it again. She was desperate. She was watching her entire social network evaporate in front of her eyes, and she needed a target for her rage. When she realized I was not going to answer, she resorted to leaving rapid-fire voicemails. I opened the visual voicemail application and played the audio on speaker. "Lauren, you have to fix this right now!" Caroline shrieked through the phone, her voice distorted by pure panic and the echo of the emptying restaurant. "Everyone is leaving. David is threatening to call the police. Jamal is sitting on the floor crying. You have to send another email and tell them it was a prank. Tell them the blockchain thing was a lie. They are walking out on us, Lauren. They are leaving me with the bill for a 50-person dinner. You have to wire me the money for the dinner. You owe me that much. Pick up the phone." I deleted the voicemail before she even finished her final sentence. The absolute delusion was staggering. Her son-in-law was facing decades in federal prison. She was being evicted in less than 3 days. And she was still trying to order me to pay for her luxury dinner. I watched the group chat notifications continue to roll in. By my count, 45 people had already exited the chat. 4 more followed suit within the next minute. 49 relatives had officially cut ties. They were actively blocking Caroline's number, securing their own bank accounts, and running as far away from the blast radius as possible. The mass exodus was complete. The prestigious elite family unit that Caroline had spent decades aggressively curating was reduced to zero. She had nobody left to impress. She had nobody left to manipulate. She was sitting in a restaurant she could not afford, flanked by a fraudulent husband, a fake influencer daughter, and a criminal son-in-law. I closed the group chat application and leaned back against my leather bar stool. The silence in my penthouse was absolute and incredibly satisfying. I had successfully excised the cancer from my life. I had reclaimed my dignity, protected my assets, and delivered a masterclass in corporate retaliation. I poured the rest of my iced water into the sink and closed my laptop. The 49 relatives had served their purpose as witnesses to the execution. They had seen the truth, and they had reacted exactly as I predicted. But as I prepared to turn off my devices for the night, a single notification popped up on my screen. It was not an automated group chat exit. It was a direct email response to the thread. I checked the sender address, and a cold shiver ran down my spine despite the warmth of the room. Out of the 50 people on that mailing list, 49 had fled in terror. The 50th relative had not run away. The 50th relative was Grandma Constance, and she was the one person in this entire bloodline who was infinitely more ruthless than I could ever hope to be. I stared at her email. The message contained a single line of text. I am commandeering my flight crew right now. I closed my laptop. Constance Harrington did not waste jet fuel on trivial drama. If she was leaving her Palm Beach estate in the middle of the night, she smelled blood in the water. I walked to my bedroom and slept. The initial battle was over, but the actual war was about to begin. The next morning, sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse. I woke up feeling remarkably rested. For the first time in a decade, my phone was not flooded with passive-aggressive demands from Caroline. I walked into the kitchen, started the espresso machine, and opened my laptop. The $75 million acquisition funds were securely locked in my portfolio. Phoenix Holdings was operating perfectly smoothly. I was absolutely untouchable. My phone rang at exactly 9. The caller identification displayed a Florida area code. I answered the call, placing the mobile phone on speaker as I poured my hot espresso. "Good morning, grandmother," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. Lauren Constance replied. Her voice was sharp and completely devoid of warmth. "I read your email last night. I read every single attachment. I also had my legal team verify the county deed you provided regarding the estate. You own their house." "I do," I confirmed. "You bought it out of foreclosure 3 years ago through a shell corporation," Constance stated. She sounded clinically fascinated. "You let them live there, and then you evicted them on Mother's Day in front of 50 people." "They pushed my hand," I replied calmly. "Caroline handed me a fraudulent invoice for $80,000 and threatened to disown me." I balanced the ledger. A sharp laugh echoed through the speaker. "You have my ruthlessness, Lauren. I always suspected you had an actual spine, but we have a much larger problem to discuss." I leaned against the marble island. "What kind of problem?" "Your email contained a detailed blockchain flowchart," Constance said, her tone dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You traced the stolen funds from Jamal's crypto scheme directly into Madeline's checking accounts. I spent the night having my forensic accountants review my retirement trusts, the ones Caroline and Jamal convinced me to let them help manage last year." My blood ran cold. I knew Jamal was running a Ponzi scheme, but I assumed he was only scamming the gullible aunts and uncles. "He stole from you." $2 million, Constance said. The words hit the air like falling anvils. They liquidated a high-yield municipal bond portfolio and funneled the cash through 3 offshore entities. They thought I would not notice because the trust generates massive quarterly returns. They thought I was just a senile old woman playing golf in Florida. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I am landing at the Boeing field in exactly 2 hours, Constance announced. "I have my chief legal counsel traveling with me." I instructed my assistant to summon Caroline Harrison Madeline and Jamal to the downtown offices of my Seattle legal firm at 1 o'clock this afternoon. I told them we are having an emergency family meeting to deal with your insubordination. They think I am coming to save them from your eviction notice. And you want me there, I guessed. I want you sitting right next to me, Constance commanded. You cracked the armor, Lauren. Now I am going to completely level the building. Bring the blockchain data. I will see you at 1. The line went dead. I set the phone down. Caroline and Jamal had stolen $2 million from a billionaire who routinely destroyed corporate rivals for sport. They were walking blindly into an execution chamber, utterly convinced they were walking into a sanctuary. I finished my espresso and selected a sharply tailored navy blue suit. This was not a family gathering anymore. This was a corporate tribunal. I gathered my secure laptop and headed down to the parking garage. The drive to the downtown legal district took less than 15 minutes. I handed my keys to the valet and rode the private elevator up to the 40th floor. The receptionist immediately guided me into a massive glass-walled conference room. Constance was already there. At 82 years old, she was a terrifying force of nature. She wore an immaculate tailored white pantsuit. She sat at the head of the dark mahogany table flanked by 2 stone-faced corporate attorneys. She did not stand when I walked in. She simply pointed to the empty leather chair directly to her right. "Sit," she ordered. "Have you verified the data?" I opened my laptop and connected to the screen projector on the wall. "The data is flawless, grandmother. Every dollar is tracked." "Good." Constance replied, her eyes narrowing toward the heavy oak doors of the conference room. "My assistant just notified me. The rats have entered the building." Right on cue, the double doors swung open. Caroline burst into the room, her eyes red and puffy, her designer clothes looking slightly rumpled from her sleepless night of panic. Harrison followed closely behind her, looking like a man marching to the gallows. Madeline and Jamal brought up the rear. Jamal was sweating profusely, his hands trembling as he clutched a leather briefcase. They froze the second they saw me sitting calmly next to the billionaire matriarch. Mother Caroline gasped, ignoring me entirely and rushing toward Constance. "Thank God you are here. Lauren has lost her mind. She hacked Jamal's business. She forged eviction documents. She is trying to throw us out on the street. You have to stop her." Constance did not move a single muscle. She stared at her daughter with eyes devoid of any maternal affection. "Sit down, Caroline." Constance commanded, her voice slicing through the room like a razor. "All 4 of you. Sit down right this instant. We are going to conduct a comprehensive financial review." Caroline hesitated, deeply confused by the freezing reception. She slowly pulled out a leather chair directly opposite me, pulling Harrison down next to her. Madeline and Jamal sat at the far end of the long table, looking incredibly small and terrified in the massive corporate setting. The trap was perfectly sprung. The heavy wooden doors clicked shut behind them, securely locking them inside the conference room. The heavy wooden doors clicked shut behind them, securely locking them inside the conference room. The acoustic paneling immediately absorbed the sound, leaving a dead, oppressive silence that seemed to suffocate the air right out of the room. Caroline shifted uncomfortably in her leather chair. She looked around the massive table, her eyes darting between Constance's icy glare and my completely relaxed posture. She still did not understand the hierarchy of the room. She still believed she could talk her way out of the execution. Mother Caroline started, her voice attempting to project the polished country club confidence that was rapidly deteriorating. "I am so relieved you flew out. Lauren has been completely out of control. She sent an email to the entire family filled with forged documents. She is trying to claim she owns our estate and is threatening to evict us. We need your legal team to file a restraining order against her before she does any more damage to the family reputation." Constance folded her hands precisely on top of the mahogany table. The diamonds on her fingers caught the harsh fluorescent light. She did not look at Caroline. She turned her head slowly, fixing her gaze entirely on Jamal, who was sweating so profusely his designer shirt collar was completely soaked. "Jamal," Constance said. Her voice was smooth, quiet, and absolutely terrifying. "Caroline tells me you are a financial visionary. She tells me you manage a highly successful cryptocurrency hedge fund. She brags about your seed rounds and your revolutionary blockchain infrastructure. So tell me, Jamal, how exactly are the markets treating you today? Jamal swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed up and down. He gripped the edge of the table, desperately trying to summon the arrogant finance bro persona he used to manipulate my naive parents. He cleared his throat. The markets are highly volatile right now, Constance. Jamal stammered, his voice lacking any of its usual volume. But our core infrastructure remains solid. We are navigating a complex liquidity phase. The digital asset space requires a long-term perspective to properly realize the decentralized alpha. Once the current cycle corrects, we expect massive yields for our early investors. Constance stared at him for a full 10 seconds without blinking. The silence stretched out, tightening like a wire around Jamal's neck. Decentralized alpha, Constance repeated. She tasted the words as if they were poison. You sound like a desperate salesman reading a brochure he does not understand. Let me be very clear, Jamal. I built a commercial real estate empire while you were still wearing diapers. I do not deal in digital fairy tales. I deal in hard, audited mathematics. And the math I reviewed last night tells a very different story about your success. Constance gestured sharply to the senior corporate attorney sitting to her left. The lawyer opened his briefcase and extracted 4 thick black binders. He slid one across the polished table to Caroline, one to Harrison, one to Madeline, and the final one to Jamal. The binders hit the wood with a heavy, synchronized thud. Open them, Constance ordered. Caroline's hands trembled as she opened the cover of her binder. Harrison leaned over, his eyes scanning the first page. I watched the remaining blood drain completely from my father's face. Madeline did not even look at the documents. She just stared at Jamal, her chest heaving in rapid, panicked breaths. Lauren Constance commanded, without breaking eye contact with Jamal. Put the data on the screen. I tapped my keyboard. The massive projector behind Constance flared to life. I did not show the $80,000 invoice or the eviction notice. That was small change. I displayed the comprehensive high-resolution blockchain forensic audit I had generated the night before. Red arrows crisscrossed the bright screen, tracing millions of dollars flowing out of legitimate banking institutions, washing through unregulated offshore cryptocurrency exchanges, and dumping directly into anonymous shell wallets. This is a complete financial autopsy of your operation, Jamal, I announced, ensuring my voice carried the same clinical detachment as the lawyers sitting beside me. It maps every single transaction you executed over the last 24 months. It shows the incoming wire transfers from your investors, including the substantial contributions from our aunts and uncles. I clicked to the next slide. A pie chart appeared breaking down the exact expenditure of the incoming capital. As you can see, I continued 0% of the capital was allocated to any legitimate blockchain infrastructure or liquidity pools. Instead, 60% of the funds were transferred into your personal accounts to cover catastrophic margin calls from your failed day trading. The remaining 40% was funneled directly to Madeline to finance her fraudulent influencer lifestyle, including the purchase of luxury vehicles, designer handbags, and first-class vacations designed to project the illusion of wealth. Madeline let out a sharp, hysterical sob. She buried her face in her hands. "Mom," she wept, her voice muffled. "He lied to me. I did not know the money was stolen. I swear I did not know." Caroline slammed her binder shut. She glared at me, her eyes burning with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You fabricated this entire presentation," Caroline hissed. "You hacked his systems and manipulated the data to make him look guilty. Mother, you cannot possibly believe this bitter, jealous girl over your own son-in-law. She is just trying to destroy us because we held her accountable for her failures." Constance slammed her open palm onto the table. The explosive sound instantly silenced Caroline. "Do not insult my intelligence," Caroline Constance roared, her 82-year-old voice echoing with absolute authority. "Lauren did not fabricate anything. My independent forensic accounting team spent the entire night verifying every single data point on that screen. Your golden son-in-law is running a textbook Ponzi scheme. He is a criminal." Harrison finally found his voice. His tone was weak, pleading, and utterly pathetic. "Constance, please." Jamal made some bad trades. The market shifted unexpectedly. We can liquidate some assets and make the investors whole. We just need a bridge loan to cover the shortfall until the market recovers. Liquidate what assets? Harrison Constance asked, her voice dropping back to a lethal whisper. You do not have any assets. You do not even own the roof over your head. You lost the family estate 3 years ago because you are a financial incompetent. You have been living on the charity of the daughter you constantly berate. Lauren owns your house, Harrison. She subsidized your fake country club existence, and you repaid her by attempting to extort $80,000 from her in front of 50 people. Harrison shrank back into his chair, as if he had been physically struck. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. You, Harrison stammered. You are Phoenix Holdings. I am, I replied smoothly. And the eviction notice currently taped to your front door is completely valid. You have exactly 48 hours left to vacate my property. Caroline began to hyperventilate again. She gripped her chest, realizing the walls were rapidly closing in. The protective bubble of her mother's wealth was not going to save her. Constance was not here to bail them out. She was here to preside over their execution. Mother, please. Caroline begged, tears streaming down her face. We have nothing. We will be on the street. You have to help us. You cannot let your own daughter become homeless. We will do anything you want. Just pay Lauren the $80,000 we owe her in rent and help Jamal fix his fund. We are family. Constance leaned forward, her eyes narrowing into cold, predatory slits. Family, Constance repeated softly. You want to invoke family loyalty now, Caroline, after what you did to my retirement accounts. Caroline looked bewildered. Your retirement accounts? What are you talking about? Constance signaled to the lawyer on her right. He slid one final thin red folder across the table. It stopped directly in front of Jamal. Jamal stared at it like it was a venomous snake. Open it, Constance commanded. Let us discuss the real reason I flew across the country. Let us discuss the $2 million you stole from me. Jamal reached for the thin red folder with hands that shook so violently he could barely grasp the cardboard edge. He flipped it open. Inside lay a stack of heavily redacted bank transfers highlighted with aggressive yellow marker. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sharp rustle of the paper. Caroline leaned over to look, her eyes scanning the documents. The manufactured confusion on her face immediately morphed into genuine, unadulterated terror. Let us review the timeline, Constance said, her voice echoing off the glass walls. 14 months ago, Caroline, you came to me crying. You claimed Harrison was making poor investments, and you needed a secure, high-yield vehicle to protect a fraction of your inheritance early. You begged me to let your brilliant son-in-law manage a minor municipal bond portfolio. $2 million. A drop in the bucket of my total estate, but a test to see if Jamal was truly the visionary you claimed he was. Mother, I thought he was investing it, Caroline blurted out, her voice shrill. I did not know what he was doing with the money. I trusted him. He told me the returns were compounding. Constance slammed her hand onto the table, the sharp crack silencing Caroline instantly. Do not lie to me, she roared. You did not just trust him. You actively facilitated the theft. You held power of attorney for that specific sub-account. You authorized the liquidation of those bonds. Constance gestured to the senior attorney. He stood up and projected a new document onto the screen behind me. It was a joint authorization form bearing both Caroline and Jamal's signatures. Lauren, Constance said, not taking her eyes off Caroline. Explain to your mother where her signature sent my money. I tapped my keyboard, bringing up the next slide in the forensic audit. The screen displayed a clear, undeniable flow of capital. On October 12th, I announced, keeping my tone entirely clinical, the $2 million bond portfolio was liquidated. The cash was transferred into an intermediary holding account managed by Jamal's cryptocurrency fund. However, the money never purchased a single digital asset. Instead, exactly 48 hours later, $1.5 million was wired directly into a private offshore account. I clicked to the next slide showing the ownership records for the offshore account. That account is registered to a shell corporation wholly owned by Caroline Twice continued. Over the past 12 months, those stolen funds were systematically withdrawn to pay for your country club memberships, Madeline's lavish anniversary party, and your extensive wardrobe upgrades. You did not just unknowingly sign over access, Mom. You took a massive cut of the stolen money to fund your fake lifestyle after you stopped paying rent on the house I owned. Harrison turned to his wife, his face a mask of absolute horror. You stole from your mother, Harrison whispered, his voice trembling. You told me the country club dues were being covered by a sponsorship deal. You told me Jamal was paying for Madeline's anniversary out of his crypto dividends. You embezzled millions and spent it on clothes. Caroline shrank away from her husband. She looked frantically around the room, searching for an exit that did not exist. Harrison, you do not understand, she pleaded. We were drowning. Lauren was charging us rent we could not afford. The social season was starting. If I did not pay the club dues, we would have been expelled. I had to maintain our image. You maintained your image by committing felony elder financial abuse, the senior attorney interjected. His voice was devoid of any emotion. Under federal law, defrauding a senior citizen of assets exceeding $1 million carries severe mandatory minimum sentencing. Furthermore, because you utilized international wire transfers to funnel the capital through Jamal's fraudulent cryptocurrency operation, you have triggered federal conspiracy and money laundering statutes. Madeline, who had been sitting frozen in her chair, suddenly pushed herself away from the table. She stared at Jamal as if he were a monster. You dragged my mother into a federal crime, Madeline screamed, tears ruining her contoured makeup. You promised us we were building an empire. You told me the money was clean. Jamal finally snapped. He slammed his fists onto the mahogany table. Do not act like you are innocent, Madeline. Jamal shouted, his voice cracking under the intense pressure. You spent $500,000 of that money on your influencer trips to Dubai. You bought designer jewelry and tagged it as sponsored content. You knew I was not trading crypto. You knew I was just moving cash around. You all knew. You just wanted the money to keep flowing so you could pretend you were royalty. The sheer toxicity of the family was on full display. In the face of undeniable legal accountability, they turned on each other like starving wolves. There was no loyalty, no love, and no unified front. Constance watched the pathetic display with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. She raised her hand, and the room instantly fell silent. The raw power she commanded was breathtaking. I gave you everything, Constance said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. I paid for your education, Caroline. I funded your early lifestyle. I even tolerated Harrison's endless string of mediocre business failures. But you crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. You stole from me to fund your vanity, and you spent 10 years emotionally abusing the only granddaughter I have who possesses an ounce of actual intelligence and integrity. Mother, please. Caroline begged, sliding out of her chair and dropping to her knees on the expensive carpet. I am your daughter. You cannot do this. I will pay you back. We are family. We are not family, Constance replied coldly. We share genetics. That is a biological accident I am currently rectifying. I already rewrote the will entirely. You get nothing at all. My lawyers stand ready. Now. Now, Constance repeated, her voice cutting through the remaining tension like a scythe. She did not look at Caroline, who was still weeping on the floor. Instead, the billionaire matriarch simply nodded toward the senior corporate attorney. He reached into his suit jacket, retrieved a small remote, and pressed a single button. The heavy mahogany doors of the conference room swung open. They were not opened by the receptionist or a legal assistant. 4 men and women wearing dark tactical windbreakers walked briskly into the room. The bold yellow letters on the backs of their jackets read FBI. The lead agent, a tall man with a severe, uncompromising expression, stepped directly toward the far end of the table. He did not ask for permission to speak. Jamal Williams, the agent, announced, his voice booming in the enclosed space. We have a federal warrant for your arrest on multiple counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. Jamal scrambled backward, his chair tipping over and crashing heavily to the carpet. He held his hands up in a frantic defensive gesture, the arrogant facade completely disintegrating. Wait, There is a massive misunderstanding here. I am managing a legitimate digital asset portfolio. I have the seed round paperwork right here in my briefcase. I can show you the blockchain ledger. The agent did not humor the desperate lie. Turn around and place your hands behind your back, Mr. Williams. The Securities and Exchange Commission, along with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, has already seized your physical servers. We have fully documented the illegal transfer of stolen investor capital into your offshore shell accounts. Two agents stepped forward, instantly grabbing Jamal by the arms and spinning him around forcefully. The sharp, metallic click of handcuffs echoed across the silent room. Jamal's custom suit wrinkled awkwardly as his arms were pinned tightly behind his back. The untouchable crypto bro who had mocked my career just 24 hours ago was now weeping openly, begging Harrison to call a defense attorney. Harrison did not move a single muscle. He was completely paralyzed, staring at the federal agents as if they were ghosts. His own complicity in funding the fraud weighed heavily on his frozen posture. Madeline backed against the glass wall of the conference room, pressing her hands tightly over her mouth. She watched her husband being read his Miranda rights in real time. But the federal execution was not finished. A female agent stepped toward Madeline, pulling a thick manila folder from her tactical bag. "Madeline Williams," the agent stated clinically, "you are not currently under arrest, but you are a primary person of interest in this ongoing federal investigation. As of 10 o'clock this morning, a federal judge has authorized the immediate freezing of all your personal and business banking accounts." Madeline gasped, her perfectly manicured hands dropping limply to her sides. "You cannot do that," she shrieked, panic raising her voice to a frantic pitch. "I have major brand deals. I have vendor payments due tomorrow morning. I run a legitimate marketing agency. I need immediate access to my capital to maintain my payroll." "Your agency is a fraudulent enterprise funded entirely by the proceeds of a massive Ponzi scheme," the agent countered, completely immune to Madeline's manufactured distress. "We have tracked over $500,000 of stolen retirement funds routed directly into your accounts to purchase fake followers, fabricated engagement metrics, and luxury goods. The designer bag sitting on the table right now is considered evidence of money laundering. It will be confiscated before you leave this building today." Madeline looked at the bright orange Birkin bag resting next to her shattered phone. The physical manifestation of her fake wealth was being seized as criminal evidence. She lunged toward Caroline, grabbing her mother by the shoulders and shaking her violently. "Mom, do something. Call your lawyers. Tell them I did not know anything about the crypto trading. Tell them Jamal lied to me. I will lose my verified status. My sponsors will drop my contracts by tonight. My entire life is over." Caroline, still crumpled on the floor, could only stare blankly at her favorite daughter. The matriarch, who had violently controlled every aspect of our family image, was utterly powerless. She had no money, no home, and no social standing left to leverage. She was completely broken, staring into the void of her own inevitable ruin. I sat quietly next to Constance, watching the facade of the golden child shatter into a million irreparable pieces. Madeline had spent her entire adult life curating an illusion of effortless superiority. She had stolen my business plan to shortcut her way to success, bypassing the hard work, late nights, and relentless discipline required to actually build something sustainable. Now the foundation of stolen money was completely gone. She was not a successful chief executive. She was not a wealthy influencer. She was the complicit wife of an indicted federal criminal facing catastrophic debt and potential prison time. Her entire identity had been deleted. Madeline spun around, her desperate eyes locking onto me. "Lauren, you have to help me," she begged, tears ruining her makeup. "You have $75 million. You can easily post Jamal's bail. You can hire us a top-tier defense team. We are sisters, Lauren. You cannot let me go down for this. I did not write the fraudulent code. I just spent the money." I leaned forward, resting my elbows deliberately on the mahogany table. I looked at the sister who had happily participated in my public humiliation just yesterday. "Madeline," I said, my voice steady and devoid of pity. "Yesterday, you sat at a Michelin-starred restaurant and laughed, while Mom handed me an invoice for being a failure. You wore diamonds bought with Grandma Constance's stolen retirement funds. I am not posting bail for the man who defrauded our family, and I am certainly not funding the legal defense of a fake influencer who stole my intellectual property. You will face the absolute consequences of your actions completely on your own today. The federal agents did not linger. They hauled Jamal to his feet, his designer shoes scuffing awkwardly as they marched him toward the heavy oak doors. Madeline scrambled after them, her tear-streaked face a picture of absolute devastation. She was leaving behind the seized Birkin bag and the illusion of her entire life, chasing a man destined for a federal penitentiary. The doors swung shut, cutting off her frantic sobbing. Constance turned back to Caroline and Harrison. The billionaire matriarch had removed the infection from her family tree. She stood up. "You have entirely destroyed yourselves," Constance said. "My specialized legal team will immediately manage the aggressive recovery of my stolen funds. I will absolutely never speak to either of you again. Do not ever attempt to call my private numbers. You are completely excised from the Harrington legacy." Constance turned to me, offering a single approving nod, then walked out of the room flanked by her two corporate attorneys. I closed my laptop, packed it into my leather bag, and stood up. I did not spare a single glance at the two pathetic figures remaining at the mahogany table. I walked straight out of the building purposefully, leaving my parents to marinate in the absolute pathetic ruin of their own making. The sun rose bright and utterly freezing on Tuesday morning. At 8 o'clock, I sat in my armored black Audi parked discreetly across from the $5 million estate. I held a cup of black coffee watching the quiet street. The neighborhood was a pristine sanctuary of old money and privilege. It was the perfect stage for a public execution, right on Schedule 3. Sheriff cruisers turned the corner. Their red and blue lights flashed aggressively, reflecting off the manicured lawns. The flashing lights were enough to shatter the tranquility. The cruisers pulled up in front of the estate. 4 uniformed deputies stepped out, their faces grim. They walked up the sweeping stone driveway. One deputy held a thick clipboard containing the court-authorized writ of restitution. I rolled down my tinted window just an inch, letting the crisp morning air into the cabin of my car. I wanted to hear every single detail. The lead deputy pounded heavily on the massive double front doors. The sound echoed down the quiet street. "Open up, King County Sheriff," the deputy barked, his voice carrying maximum authority. "We are executing a court-ordered eviction. Vacate the premises immediately." The heavy wooden door cracked open. Harrison stood in the threshold, looking like a man who had aged 20 years. Behind him, the grand marble foyer was a disaster zone. Without access to frozen bank accounts, my parents had been unable to hire a moving company. The floor was littered with cheap black trash bags and mismatched cardboard boxes overflowing with Caroline's designer clothes. "You have to give us more time," Harrison pleaded, holding his hands up defensively. "We are trying to pack. We just need one more day." "Your 72-hour notice expired at 6 o'clock this morning," the deputy stated coldly, stepping forward and forcing the door open wider. "You are trespassing on private property. Step outside right now or you will be arrested." Caroline appeared at the top of the grand sweeping staircase. She looked utterly unrecognizable. Her platinum hair was a chaotic mess, and she clutched a jewelry box tightly to her chest. She shrieked as 2 deputies bypassed Harrison and entered the foyer. "Do not touch my things!" Caroline screamed, scrambling frantically down the marble stairs. "You do not understand who I am. I am a member of the Property Owners Association. You cannot do this to me." The deputies ignored her entirely. They grabbed the black trash bags and began hauling them out the front door, tossing them unceremoniously onto the pristine green grass of the front lawn. Another deputy grabbed Harrison by the arm, firmly escorting the broken man out of the house and down the stone steps. Caroline followed, weeping hysterically, clutching her jewelry box as if it were a life preserver. The spectacle was impossible to ignore. The flashing police lights had drawn the attention of the neighborhood. Several wealthy women, the same women Caroline regularly tried to impress, had stopped their morning walks. They stood on the sidewalks holding the leashes of their purebred dogs, staring at the humiliating scene. They watched in absolute silence as the deputies hauled Caroline's imported leather sofa out the front door and dumped it onto the driveway. Caroline spotted the women watching her. She tried to hide her face, completely crushed by the social mortification. She was no longer the elite hostess. She was a bankrupt squatter being thrown onto the street. Then Caroline turned her head and saw my black Audi parked across the street. She locked eyes with me through the partially rolled down window. I did not look away. I took a slow sip of my coffee. The realization hit her. The daughter she had publicly shamed was sitting comfortably in a luxury vehicle watching her entire life being thrown onto the pavement. Caroline dropped her jewelry box. The clasp broke, sending pearl necklaces scattering across the concrete driveway. She did not stop to pick them up. She lunged forward, running frantically across the lawn toward my car. Lauren Caroline sobbed, her hands slamming against the hood of my Audi. "Please, you have to stop them. They are throwing our entire lives onto the grass. The neighbors are watching. You own this house. Tell them to stop. We are your parents. You cannot leave us on the street like animals." I pressed the button on the door console. The tinted window rolled up smoothly, sealing off her desperate pleas. The thick safety glass blocked out her crying. I put the car into gear, feeling the powerful engine hum beneath me. Caroline stepped back, covering her mouth in horror, as I accelerated away from the curb, leaving her standing in the gutter surrounded by her arrogance. I navigated the winding roads of the gated community, the heavy tires of my armored vehicle gliding smoothly over the pristine asphalt. The sprawling estate that had been the ultimate symbol of my parents' manufactured supremacy was now a crime scene of vanity. The neighbors they had spent decades trying to impress were now the audience to their destruction. I merged onto the highway, setting my course for the heart of the city. My phone vibrated against the leather console. The caller identification displayed an unknown number. I knew exactly who it was. Caroline had borrowed a phone, or perhaps Harrison had scrambled to purchase a prepaid device after their accounts were frozen. I did not answer. I watched the call alert flash on the screen until it timed out. Less than a minute later, a voicemail notification appeared on my screen. I tapped the audio file, letting it play through the car speakers as I drove toward the skyline. Harrison spoke first. His voice was completely stripped of the artificial authority he had weaponized against me. "Lauren, please." He sounded like a broken, desperate man, standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into the abyss. They locked the doors. "The deputies told us we cannot ever go back inside. We have $20 in cash. Caroline is sitting on the curb. She cannot stop shaking. We have no friends left to call. Everyone saw the email. Everyone saw the eviction. Please, Lauren, you made your point. You won. Just send a car for us. Book us a hotel. You have $75 million. You can spare a few thousand to keep your parents off the concrete." Caroline snatched the phone away from him. I heard the rustle of the receiver changing hands, the desperate scrambling of two people realizing they had run out of options. "Lauren," she sobbed, her voice raw and jagged. "I am sorry. I am sorry about the invoice. I am sorry about dropping you when you left school. I am sorry about all of it. Please do not leave us out here. We are your blood. You owe us." The audacity of that final sentence was the perfect closure I needed. Even in the gutter of her own making, stripped of her house money and social standing, Caroline still believed I owed her something. She still viewed me as a resource to be exploited, an obligation rather than a daughter. I reached over and pressed the delete button on the dashboard screen. The audio cut off instantly. The silence that filled the cabin of my car was glorious. I did not feel a single drop of guilt. I felt the cold, hard satisfaction of a perfectly balanced equation. I pulled my car over to the shoulder of the highway. I executed a complete factory reset on my smartphone. I watched the screen go dark as it wiped the device clean. Then I pulled the physical subscriber identity module card out of the tray, snapped it cleanly in half, and dropped the pieces into the cup holder. I had an unlisted phone waiting in my penthouse for corporate contacts. The number my parents possessed was officially dead. I had severed the final digital thread connecting me to their toxic orbit. They could scream into the void for the rest of their lives, but I would never hear them again. I arrived at my luxury high-rise building and took the private elevator up to the top floor. The steel doors slid open to reveal my sanctuary. The penthouse was a sprawling expanse of glass steel and warm wood tones. It was designed for absolute tranquility. I walked straight past the modern kitchen, dropping my bag onto the marble island, and pushed open the heavy sliding doors leading to the wraparound balcony. The crisp, clean air of Seattle hit my face, carrying the faint metallic scent of the ocean and the sharp electric energy of the bustling metropolis below. I stepped up to the reinforced glass railing and looked down at the city. The towering skyscrapers cut through the gray clouds, standing as massive monuments to ambition, discipline, and relentless focus. I had built my empire from a cheap laptop on a thrift store couch, entirely fueled by the determination to prove that I was not the failure they claimed I was. Now I owned a significant piece of the skyline. I owned my business. I owned my peace of mind. And I owned the absolute certainty that nobody would ever treat me like a stepping stone again. The skyline stretched out endlessly, a visual representation of the limitless potential that now lay before me. The generational curse was broken. The people who were supposed to protect me had tried to destroy me, and in the process they had forged me into a weapon they could not defeat. They had handed me an invoice for $80,000 because they believed my compliance was guaranteed. Instead, I handed them the absolute devastating reality of their own incompetence. I watched the sun begin to break through the overcast sky, casting a brilliant golden light across the dark waters of the Sound. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the clean, unburdened air. If you are watching this, and you are currently trapped in a family dynamic that constantly demands your submission, hear this. You do not owe your loyalty to people who view your boundaries as an insult. You do not owe your success to people who mocked your struggle. The blood in your veins does not obligate you to finance the delusions of toxic relatives. Your worth is not determined by their flawed accounting. Build your own empire in silence. Protect your peace with ruthless efficiency. And when they finally hand you the bill for their own failures, do not cry. Audit them. Thank you for listening to my story. Build your fortress, defend your boundaries, and never apologize for surviving. The story of Lauren's ruthless dismantling of her toxic family's facade offers a profound lesson on the true nature of boundaries and self-worth. For years, she endured relentless emotional abuse, gaslighting, and severe financial exploitation from the very people who were fundamentally supposed to protect and nurture her. Society frequently dictates that blood ties demand absolute, unconditional loyalty. But this narrative aggressively challenges that dangerous misconception. The core lesson here is absolute biology does not entitle anyone to your peace, your success, or your sanity. Lauren's ultimate triumph was not born out of a sudden emotional outburst of rage, but rather through meticulous, silent preparation. By focusing relentlessly on her education, building a formidable software business from the ground up, and quietly securing her own financial independence, she forged an impenetrable armor against their manipulation. Her wealth was not merely about material luxury. It served as the ultimate leverage to enforce real-world consequences. When her mother attempted to publicly humiliate and extort her with an exorbitant invoice, Lauren refused to crumble into the expected role of the obedient, broken victim. Instead, she audited them with cold, hard facts. She demonstrated brilliantly that when you detach emotionally from the need for toxic validation, you completely strip abusers of their only effective weapon. This narrative serves as a stark reminder that we are never obligated to finance the delusions of manipulative relatives or to shrink ourselves simply to make their insecurities comfortable. Genuine healing often requires walking away, locking the door behind you, and refusing to apologize for surviving the wreckage. True liberation happens the exact moment you realize your inherent value is dictated by your own resilience, not by the flawed, self-serving accounting of those who failed you. Audit your own relationships today and mercilessly cut ties with anyone who treats your healthy boundaries as a personal insult.